tonight what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about interventions and how interventions run at ISD Academy. So good evening, Dr. Stone and the Board of Trustees. I'd like to start with just a quick football analogy, comparing intervention teachers to football coaches. Because what I've found at school, actually any school that I've gone to, if those intervention teachers are real critical to the success of the students. And they're very similar to football coaches. Football coaches are very critical to the success of the football team. So if you study with football coaches, you see that typically they have things that are common. For example, what they do every football practice, they call small groups of football players together. They practice the skill, they model, they demonstrate, they go over the skill with them, and they have real hands-on learning with the football players. If they don't understand it, then they go over it again and again and again. So it's a practice that football coaches do over and over again. Actually, another piece that they do is that they do a live scrimmage. They practice the plays in the game that they've been practicing in small groups, so that when they actually get to the game, that they'll be confident and they'll be successful. These are the same things what would happen with good interventionists, instructional leaders in the classrooms do. And these are folks like our instructional coaches, our campus reading specialists, our math support teachers, our in-school tutors, our bilingual pull-outs, our ESL teachers. All these folks pull small groups daily in their classrooms. And what they do is they get them in small groups, and they're able to have conversations with the kids. They model, they demonstrate, they go through the same thing that good football coaches do with their players. They model, they demonstrate, they evaluate, and then they assess, and then they go over it over and again, just like good football coaches. So when it comes to game time or test time, that the students are confident, they're comfortable, and that they're ready to perform. Okay, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what goes on at ISD Academy. Our intervention schedule is maybe just a little different than the Thurgood Marshall intervention schedule, but our reading intervention takes place daily, 5 times a week, for 45 minutes a day in the classroom. Our math intervention goes on daily for 30 minutes a week in the classroom too. Again, sometimes they're broken into small groups, but the classroom teachers are part of that intervention too. So it's not just these groups that are being pulled, but it's also the classroom teacher that's delivering that good instruction too. And that's a real critical piece to this, is that good instruction is going on throughout the building, not just in small groups, or not just in the classroom, but also in those small groups. Okay, I'd like to kind of take you through a couple pictures and a couple slides here and just highlight some things that are going on at the Academy. This is Miss Sarah Stokes. She is a former math support teacher at the Academy. She retired last year, but we brought her back as a instructional tutor, and so she comes in and she's here modeling and going over. But the thing about the small group is that you can see exactly what's going on with the student. So if the student has a misunderstanding about what's happening, they can catch it right there. And in a large group, it's not so easy to see that. Just like on the football field, you can see that the play's broken down, but where is the play broken down? You can see it in small group exactly what's going on. Okay. Move to our next slide. This is Tracy Beck. She's a campus reading specialist at the Academy, and here she is. She's going over reading questions with the group. The kids are writing their answers on the table, and again, there's nothing magic about writing on the table, but it's just fun. I don't understand it, but kids think it's fun. And it's just another way to ask different questions. Okay, this is Miley Arrutia, and she's a bilingual pull-out teacher at the Academy, and here she's working with a Spanish group and a Spanish reading group. These students will be taking Spanish Star in just 13 days, and she's got technology going. She's speaking to them in their native language, the language that they're actually going to to take the assessment with in Spanish, and she's representative of the Academy. The Academy has 42 sections, homeroom sections, with 24 of those 42 sections are bilingual sections. So there's a lot of kids in really that Spanish is their first language, and they're still being taught in both languages there at the Academy. And again, a 24 section, that's very typical of actually a lot of ISD schools that go kinder through 6th grade that may have 24 sections. We have 24 bilingual sections. Okay, here's another group that's going on. You can see as if you go through these slides, you'll see that they're not all where just kids are practicing pen and pencil, but they're interactive, they're talking, they're hands-on. So it's a lot of interaction that's going on, and just not working in small groups with pencil and paper. This is one of our instructional coaches. This is Tammy Barlow. Here she is in science, doing a science small group. And you know, a lot of times when you see science, you see a lot of experiments and labs going on. This is our really more of a minds-on piece. So they have a hands-on, but the test is minds-on. So they have practice with minds-on activities throughout the day too. This is Lacey Shepard. She's another one of our instructional coaches, and she goes a lot with writing. This is actually a reading group that she's taken on. But again, it's where kids are talking, they're learning, they're interacting, and it's not all just simply pen and paper. Okay, so here's really the numbers, because there's some exciting news with what's been going on at the Academy. These are the comparisons between 2015 math data to the 2016 math data. These are the STAR simulations that are taken basically about 7 to 8 weeks before the actual STAR test. It gives us feedback on how kids are performing and where our low teaks are and where our high teaks are located. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that in 2015 we had 275 students that we would deem as intensive. So those are our most struggling students in 2015. 275 students were a part of that. In 2016, we dropped to 135 kids hit that same criteria. So we were ecstatic about the level of success that the students demonstrated on the STAR simulation. Okay, then in the center there, you'll see the close to passing. That's 2015. We have 105 students in that close to passing range. And then in 2016, we have 147. So again, we're headed in the right direction. Then the next column is the passing. 2015, 191 students. And then in 2016, 295 students. Again, all this is STAR simulations. It basically is an all-STAR test. So the projections from 2015 to 2016, we went from 52% projected to pass to 77% projected to pass. So we were excited, thrilled, and just doing backflips about how far that the kids had come. And again, we put a lot of I guess success and credit to intervention. And again, we think that those two things working side by side, the core curriculum in the classroom, working along with the small groups, those two things work together is where we went from where we were at last year to where we are this year. Okay, so in closing, what I'd like us to say is that we're not there yet. You can see 77%. We were excited about the growth, but still 77% is not what we're looking for. We're looking for every kid to be successful and for every child to grow. So what we've seen on our campus, we've seen teachers are learning, because there's a common theme that the intervention teachers, the classroom teacher is delivering intervention. So they are delivering intervention groups too. So they feel the success, they're fighting with the teachers to be successful, and the kids are successful with it. So there's a change that's happening in the instructional program. It's really between the leadership of the instructional leadership team, which basically are all those components of those intervention teachers that are in the classroom. They're working with kids. They're into the down and dirty of it, but they're also planning with those teachers, alongside those teachers, and along with the teachers and the students. They're feeling the success of the changes that have happened this year.
Thank you very much, Steve. So as we go back to the football metaphor, and I think we mentioned in our last presentation about the different quarters for the year, providing professional development for the teachers putting the professional development into action, sticking with the football metaphor again. We're going from the third quarter now, which is really focused on monitoring and adjusting, and we're heading toward the fourth quarter, which is ultimately where we want to see the results. But as Keith mentioned, and as I think we would all definitely want to agree with this, the work is not done. While you've got an example of some of the math projections, there are still other content areas that are still in process. There's still a lot of work to be done in these last few weeks before the assessment. But again, regardless of the assessment, we're still having these plans in place going until the end of the year. And ultimately, we're also talking about how this type of planning, this type of processing can impact things at the beginning of next year to help us really improve our processes and our systems of support. So it is a long process. And what I will say is these teachers and principals and the students are committed to getting it done. They're following the explicit instructional practices that we know are going to work, particularly in these small group settings. We're seeing the growth, and we're confident that we're heading in the right direction. But again, our goal is to be sure that all of our students grow. So we appreciate you, taking the microphone tonight. Michelle and Misty are here tonight, also showing their support, because again, we're all in this together. But thank you very much for the time, and give you a quick update.
Okay, thank you. With that, would you like to make comments first, Dr. Stone, before I open it up for questions?
Yes, and I will invite Mr. Ford to come back to the podium, because I think you're going to have some questions. On behalf of the administration, I did want to just say how hard I know that our ISD Academy and Thurgood Marshall and Carroll McCare Elementaries are working, putting a lot of things in place. I guess one question that I would have for you before the board is maybe talk a little bit about the morale on the campus and how your teachers are doing.
Yes, what I would say is that success breeds success with this, and so it's always good to work hard, but if you never see the success happening, then it's real hard day in and day out to continue to plug along. But we see teachers excited about school. We see teachers excited about learning, and with kids excited about learning too, because a lot of it is about the confidence that you have. If you don't think you can do something, then you're kind of dead in the water right there. But if you go into an assessment or to a test or whatever you're doing in life, if you have that confidence that you will be successful, that you can be successful, you're on your way to success. So we've seen a lot of that in both, actually, the students and the teachers this year.
Thank you. And I brought that up just because in the meetings that I had with them, we talked about that fuel and that success fuels success, and that's what motivates the campus. And so I know that y'all seen that, and I just commend you on the work that y'all been doing. We're not there yet. We're not there yet until we're at 100%. But the growth that we're seeing is something to celebrate.
Mr. Oliver.
Thank you, Dr. Keelan. Thank you, Mr. Ford, for your presentation. Very helpful to see some of those pictures. It just kind of brings it to life. So I appreciate you sharing that. I don't know if this is a question for Dr. Stone or who it's a question for, but do we have similar data from our other recruitment required campuses along these lines that kind of tells us where we stand at this point in time?
Now we'll kick that to Dr. Goodson, and you might have any of the executive directors are free to come up, but let's talk about the data of the other campuses.
We've noticed a similar trend, and particularly when it comes to math for the other two campuses. The overall numbers may be a little bit different, but there is an increase or there is a positive movement, so to speak, from the number of students that were in the intensive range last year compared to the number of students that have moved into the closer to passing and the passing range. That's something that we can definitely pull together for you. I don't know if we have that right. I'm sorry, I'm looking at it. Here you go. Thank you, Darwin.
So at Thurgood Marshall, particularly in the area of math, because that was the focus of this particular presentation, the intensive numbers are also declining. We went from 169 students to 111 students. For our passing or close to passing students, we went from 112 to 154, and our overall passing from 44 to 63%. For chemical care, because we did the analysis with them as well, 230 students in the intensive, and now we're looking at about 133. We went from 154 in that closing passing zone to 174, and we're looking at moving to passing or projected passing from 239 to 297 students. So it was great to see that level of analysis, particularly in the area of math. And if you all will recall last year that math was not counted in the state accountability, so we wanted to focus on that because that was a success story with all of our campuses.
Darwin, you might just mention before you leave, so what do you do, so what do you do now with that data? So what's going on now in this home stretch in these last couple of weeks before the students take the test?
Well, Keith mentioned encouragement and keeping uplifting everyone, keeping them positive. As a former principal that worked in the capacity where you can see student success and have that success, it's important that daily we have conversations with our principals, myself, Dr. Gibbons, the other executive director for the Improvement McBride campus. What we don't want them to do is lose hope. What we are very, very excited about is the level of analysis we do every year, every week, where we move from having just the simulations to weekly assessments. We even moved to unit assessment that happened in all of our campuses that take it a step further, actually developing their own assessments where we're able to target exactly what's happening with our students. And every one of those conversations are moving on a daily basis. It's important that we keep them focused. It's important that we help them to understand the big picture, because what you don't want campuses, particularly teachers, to feel is that level of not anything is happening. So those daily conversations, those daily accomplishments, and when we actually praise the students of their good work, we're getting to know the students by names, even as executive directors, and that's very powerful for us.
And would you characterize what we're seeing in the other subject areas as similar to what we're seeing in math?
Yes, and we looked at, and I knew this question would come, so I asked them to kind of be prepared to, besides, even though the focus of your presentation was on math, you want to talk about the growth we're seeing in reading?
Yes, in the area of transparency, reading was a concern with all three of our campuses. We just need to be transparent about that. It has been a struggle. In fact, in their campus improvement plans on all of our improvement required campuses, they were very aligned to our district improvement plans, which focus on our ELLs and special ed students. I just want you to know, if you peel back the onion and look at the statistics for these campuses, particularly the academy and Bouquet, you have a high population of left students. So when you're faced with those types of challenges, as well as the population that Thurgood Marshall served, you come into the starting gate already behind. So we've not accepted that as an excuse. We've embraced it. We've owned the challenge. And what's happening is what's actually happening when you walk into the building. If you've been in Thurgood Marshall, the entire building is being used to access learning. Every learning space, every corner of the room is being used. You go into the CDE and the academy, the same concept is there. Every minute is maximized, every moment is maximized. So while reading is a struggle, there's some great statistical data and reference to science. If I could highlight Carolyn Bouquet, they've grown tremendously as I flip through that was right. Make sure I get to science. Help me out. There it is. Yeah, and particularly at Carolyn Bouquet, we're looking at numbers move from projected passing from 93 to 100 students where they were in the past. And Ms. Oliver, when you in that environment and you looking at the challenges and struggles of the kids that's actually going through that experience, what Keith showed in terms of Tammy Barlow, that instructional coach, is having that one-on-one dialogue. That's really where the magic is happening. Misconceptions are being erased because it's important to know for the student have that comfort to be able to tell you exactly what their struggles are so that you can dissect for them and give them the confidence to move on. So again, in the spirit of transparency, reading is our continued focus. It's the focus of all 3 CIBs, and it's the focus as we move to close out this year and moving into next year.
And I think that it aligns back to our conversation that we had at the last board meeting with the need for the additional allocations so that we could have the reading support. And that is a concern. And we have to have that focus on core instruction and reading and have those reading specialists working with those campuses, all of our campuses, because it continues to be a concern.
Yeah, sorry, just one last, but to close that discussion out, I appreciate so much, but I just know the level of effort that's going into this. I know the focus is there, and I just hope that we can all, whatever our challenges are and whatever the reality is, let's just be open about that, no surprises. And so please continue to share with us where we are in that regard. The last question that I had was just, through the course of this benchmarking, are there any other campuses that you're concerned about the ability that they might, fall into that improvement required category that aren't already on the list?
Dr. Goodson, and I asked Ms. Payne to come out to the podium. Come on.
Early on, we were able to analyze the data from the end of last year and determine we do have other campuses that are kind of on our radar. We call them our priority campuses. And throughout the year, what we've done is, in addition to reallocating central support to our 3 IR campuses, we've also taken that same approach to these other campuses that are, they have the same types of challenges as it relates to their data. And we actually had a separate sit-down meeting with those campus principals to talk through what they are seeing as the challenges. This was back at the very beginning of the semester, right around the same time as we were meeting with our IR campuses to follow up on their plans. They see the same types of challenges. It's hard to predict exactly how things are going to turn out right now, but we know that they need a specific level of support that we have to provide. We also have to provide a different type of monitoring that goes into analyzing their data. And that's a big piece of how we've approached all of the priority campuses. So right now we have about 10 or so that are on our priority list. They are not, they're not in an improvement required status right now, but for us, anybody that's close is too close. And so that's why we've really revamped the way that we use our cluster specialists from the reading, math, science, social studies, and bilingual, and differentiation specialists. It is all hands on deck. We've taken a look at everyone's schedule so that we can target anybody that we're considering a priority campus.
Ms. Payne?
I think the thing that I would just echo what Dr. Goodson said is that the way we have deployed the specialists this year from a central level is completely different than the way we've done it before. In the past, it was about being fair and being seen. Well, this campus has to have those specialists just go here, here, here. We didn't do that this year. We looked at the data from the very beginning and said, where do we need their support? And that's through modeling for teachers, that's pulling small groups, and that deployment has happened no less than 4 times this year, where we've looked at data, looked at unit assessments, looked at the simulations, and we've said, okay, we have to redeploy. And that's also making sure that they're the ones providing the professional development. So not only do the teachers see them at the classroom level, they're also the same faces, they're standing before them in professional development. And that holds a lot of credibility for a teacher. You're not somebody standing from afar telling me how to change my instruction. I actually see you in action, and I see you working with my kids. So I think that that's really important to know. So it's not about our cluster specialists being everywhere anymore. It's where they need to be. And that's been a really big change for us.
Dr. Stone, if I just might add as well, that as the board is aware, and Ms. Noriega does a phenomenal job of updating you on the increased passing standards and the increased accountability measures that are available, and as we look forward to moving from 4 indices to 5, we do have identified 2 junior highs that are on that same priority list. Again, they are not currently identified as an IR campus, but due to past performances and then projecting based upon simulation data, where potentially they are right now, they have been identified as priority. And just as Dr. Goodson mentioned, very specific targeted intervention plans were implemented on August 25th, ensuring that the students who were involved in the interventions that were most appropriate and most identified their individual needs.
Any other reflections, Mr. Lynn?
Thank you, Dr. Hewen. So I guess, one of the things that I had, and I thank you, Mr. Oliver, for bringing this up, is the reading issue. And tell me if I'm mistaken, but doesn't the state only give us a year, or schools in particular, a year to make a student English proficient enough to take the test? Is that right?
It depends on how long they've been in the country. It depends on their individual circumstances. If they're a refugee, for example, there are a few different options that we have when it comes to taking an assessment. But the window is narrow when it comes to second language learners and whether or not they have a different option of taking the test in Spanish, for example, or if they have to take it in English. So it's definitely a narrow option for many of our kids.
Okay. And I think that's important to note, the limited amount of time that the state gives us in order to get a child into English proficiency. I'm not making it as an excuse, just a realization for that. And I want to thank Crystal Ford for his presentation today. ISD Academy is one of the first schools I had the opportunity to visit as a trustee. It is a really special place. And I'm really encouraged by the work that's being done there. And I want to echo the sentiments of some of my colleagues about the additional resources that are in the mix of this budget. I was very encouraged to hear not just redeployment, but also the increase in reading specialists, because the exclusion of math from last year's assessment test really exposed not a flaw, but kind of a weakness that has been masking by the math scores. So I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing. And I guess my question that I have is do we know that the upcoming cycle, if math is going to be excluded again? Or is it going to be included, or do we have any indication from TEA?
And again, Dr. Goodson, Ms. Payne, this might just be a good time to just give a little brief overview about what we know about the passing standards increasing, as well as what will be counted in accountability this year.
Okay, well, what we do know, and I'm no LBS, so. What we do know right now is that we have math included, writing included, reading included, and then, of course, science and social studies, and also STAR A. That's the special education exam for our students who take the alternate accommodations. So, we have no more modified. We do still have STAR All 2. So the thing just to consider is that we still hold where you have the 4 indices, as Dr. Goodson mentioned, or I think Tabitha and Brandon did. But you also want to know that with index 1 and 2, it's one or the other. It does not have to be both. The other thing to note is that with that, it is my understanding with the writing, there's no growth measure because they changed the test, and there's only expository. So in index 2, writing will not be included for that growth measure because there is nothing to measure against. That's what I understand right now. So that's where we stand. So we do believe at this time all of the assessments that have been given will count towards accountability. Ms. Brandon, do you have anything you want to add?
No, ma'am, the only other thing that I think is important is we did, as the state shifted from Pearson to ETS, there have been some challenges with our STAR A testers accessing the technology being reliable, students submitting assessments, and portions of their assessment has disappeared and not able to recover those. We have supported many of our local districts in writing letters to the Texas Education Agency and to Commissioner Morath, making him aware of our concerns in terms of holding a campus or a district accountable for the student performance on a test that was not reliable. We have not been given any definitive direction on what they will finally do, but they are telling us that they're looking individually at each student to determine whether or not that will or will not count in the accountability system.
And as a district, we did support a submission, we did a survey, and all of the districts that participated in that, actually we submitted the results of that survey and all the complications that were associated with that test to the commissioner.
You're good, that was it, sorry, that was your signaling, I'm off, that's done. Okay, Ms. Greenhalgh.
I just have a clarifying question, Dr. Stone, and I'm not sure who this should go to, but as we work so hard in this intensive instruction for students where they're trying to either catch up or get to a more, a place where they're on target, those students, it appears to me that those students would then be missing other instructional time that some of their other classmates are moving on forward with. So would you philosophically just help us understand how we manage those students and clearly we have to do that intensiveness to get them to that place, but then how do we keep supporting them so that they don't end up back in the same place again?
Initially, the way that we accomplish that is by re-evaluating the entire master schedule at the campus. And that's the big push that led us into the January Staff Development Day, where it's called an intervention plan. It basically changes the way the entire day will look. So we know that we have to have flexibility for the reading block and the math block. We make adjustments to those minutes so that they're not missing a particular part of the content, of any particular content at all. There may be a short math block that is more intense, and then now by shortening the math block a little bit, and shortening the reading block just a little bit, now we have a dedicated 45-minute block of time during the day, for example, that can be used for any type of small group instruction. So it may be intervention for one particular group, but it also means that we have support from the classroom teacher for the group that has mastered those particular teats. So they're extending it even further. So the best case for us is to be able to not have anyone just kind of sitting there at the expense of someone else getting an intervention, because that really, that affects everybody else. And that's something that we're not comfortable doing.
And I have one final question, if I could, and I'm not sure who this is directed to, maybe it's to you, Mr. Ford, but tell me why you think this is sustainable.
I can certainly start out. Keith is being one of the folks that's there at the campus can definitely add to it. I think it's sustainable because of what we've learned along the way. We've learned how to make better use of our resources and better use of our time, but then also a better way of analyzing data so that we don't fall into the same routine of waiting for the data to come back even. We're using what we're learning right now to make changes for next year so that we're not caught off guard. We're not caught with any surprises. If we can see that there's a challenge coming, we're reevaluating what the cluster specialists will do. We're reevaluating how our executive directors may be deployed in terms of the campuses that they work with. We have to take a look at everything, and it's been a reality check, it's been a gut check, because no one's comfortable being in this position. I know from the very first day that we got the notification, it's uncomfortable. So I think the way that it's sustainable is to develop a better system that really meets the needs of the kids, but then also meets the needs of the teachers. That's where we've seen that we may have fallen short with the way that we've supported them, so that it's more targeted, and it's not just, well, I hope we get the kids where they need to be, or I hope we can get the teachers to a different place. We can't wait for hope. We have to be very specific and explicit with what we teach our kids, what we teach our teachers, and then what we're expecting to see happen in the classroom afterwards. So that's just my 2 cents, but please feel free to add in.
Thank you. I think a big part of it is that you have to grow your teacher, that the instructional coaches, the campus reading specialists, the math supports, they're all there really for 2 purposes. One is to plan with the teacher, that they plan with the teacher weekly. So they, along with the teacher, they're planning side by side, just like in those small groups. They're kind of having a small group, a planning session every week together. So they're planning it together. You know, they're still modeling the classrooms. Now, at this point, I wouldn't say a whole lot of modeling is taking place, because we're all on deck with those intervention groups that are happening. But that modeling, that common language, that common planning that's going on, it's vital to the success of the program. So I think if you know, it's not just about having good intervention teachers or good ESL teachers or a good campus reading specialists or good math support teachers, but it's really about really growing that teacher and that classroom teacher being an expert in that classroom so that every teacher, every student has an expert leading the class.
If I could just add quickly, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Payne.
You might probably mention you're going to say what I'm going to say.
Yeah, one of the things I think is important to message, and while our secondary program didn't have an identified IR campuses, we recognize the challenges that our students are facing each and every day with the increased rigor of the assessment and what we know we want for students to grow each and every year. And I think what was important about what we did this year is we looked at the systems. Dr. Stone introduced the work of DRIVE, and how we approach data analysis with the campuses was not just in a reactive way, it was in a very proactive way. The way that we've designed the innovative instruction and our innovative way that we've approached intervention is a change in the system. The proposal that I made to the Board of Trustees at the last meeting where we're looking at, we recognize that reading is an issue and that to have our students be fluent in their reading and writing, we need more time and space to be able to do that. And changing the system of the schedule. So really the changes that we have made are not just because we recognize that this is an issue and we're flocking to that issue and we have a short-term solution. We are looking at this in terms of what do we need to change in the system to not only address the issue and the problems that we're facing today, but how do we face them in the future so we're not in this situation ever again and we're truly setting up each and every student for success. So it's sustainable because we're developing systems to address student needs.
I was going to just add to the sustainability, and it's tightening the curriculum. It's identifying what kids really need to know, understand, and do. We can't give 10,000 resources and different things to choose from. It's a reality of, if we're going to have this intervention time in addition to the core, you can do the time standards and you know that means reduction from something else, so how do you do that? And that means really tightening that core curriculum and identifying what really needs to be taught in order for kids to be successful, and then identifying what really needs to happen in intervention to fill those gaps. Because it's not even about reteaching or reviewing in these interventions. In some cases, it's teaching for the first time. It's teaching a science concept that kids don't have. So it's important to have all of these components and have a very tight curriculum that supports the ability to get these things taught so that teachers have the resources that they need. We know our state's working on that with the language arts, the TEKS. They're trying to narrow those. I don't think the commissioner's completely happy with the way that's set up, so they're still going back to the drawing board on it. But it is to bring that tighter because there's so much to be taught.
I just want to add one other comment regarding your question, Dr. Karen, in terms of sustainability. I just want us to remember the leader is very critical in this role. It's sustainable because as executive directors, we have constant communications with our principals and we keep them focused because it is very hard work. And we've had very upfront conversations with all of them and said, this is not pretty work. Roll your sleeves up. It's time to play the game. And we have to make sure that mentally they have the capacity to call what's happening in terms of instruction and being able to give that constructive feedback to teachers to ultimately roll them. And as executive directors, we are working with them to roll them as leaders. Because it's important to know that our principals are getting every day in the struggles that they go through, and we cannot lose sight on them, keep them focused with their SOs, keep them focused on the conversation with their campus improvement plans, keeping a laser-like focus until we get to the finish line. Sorry for going over, but it's a little, we're very passionate about the work we're doing and the conversations we have with our principals and our team and the audience. It is real work, and we just have to be involved.
No, just closing comments would be with the great team that we have, our great team. You can hear the passion in all of their voices. But just to answer your question about sustainability, that we're not satisfied until 100% of our students are successful, and we have a ways to go. It's a big ship that we're turning, but we're in it. We are in it every day, and we're putting those systems in place, and none of us are going anywhere. We're going to keep working as hard as we can, and we're going to get there. So, you know, we are changing the learning culture of the district. And I think when you make changes to a culture, it sticks. And so that's the best thing I can say to you.
Thank you. I'll just make a few wrap-up comments here and say I'm super encouraged to hear all of y'all speaking with one voice about this on behalf of the students and their families, and appreciate it. Also want to say I'm encouraged to hear you say that it's a systemic change, because we do know that those will stick. As you said, culture changes and systemic changes will stick. And then that laser beam focus on curriculum, super important as well. So thank you for those reflections tonight, and glad to hear y'all's passion about it, and appreciate the good work. Please, on behalf of you heard everyone at this table say, please pass on our thanks and encouragement to the team that's doing this hard work, this messy, unpretty work. And we also appreciate, I heard my colleagues express the transparency with which you guys are bringing us the progress as it's being made. Because again, we recognize that it's not always pretty work, and we have to roll up our sleeves, but we have to be honest with each other about where we are in order to know how to get where we want to get to. So just in closing, I'll say thank you for your presentation tonight. Thank you for coming. And with that, we will move on to our next item, which is the budget discussion. So Dr. Stone and Mr. Hargrove will lead that discussion.
Yes, I do know that Mr. Hargrove does have a few items related to the budget discussion, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. Really, we're just moving forward with the items that we shared with you earlier this spring. One of the things that has come forward numerous times is we've had the bond meetings, and then also as part of the Lake Islands Reflector Group committee meeting that Dr. Stone is going to talk about in a few minutes, has to do with doing more for teachers and making additional staff available. And so it wasn't so much a bond question as it was an operating type of a question. We feel like that the requests that have come forward this year are focused on core instruction and staff retention. And we're already having to be fairly aggressive with some of our budgeting to be able to accommodate a little over $9 million worth of requests. To go beyond that, as far as additional staff, additional salaries, there would be opportunities for reductions and looking at trying to be more efficient. That's always something that we're looking at. Anything else, it's going to involve expanding our available revenue. And really the only way for us to be able to do that under current law is to look at a tax ratification election at some point in the future. So that question keeps coming up, and it came up, I think, every meeting at the Lake Islands Reflector Committee meeting is making sure that we have additional staff, doing more for teachers. And so I just wanted to let you know we've done what it would be available to us within our available funds, and plus getting very aggressive as far as how we budget the lag for revenue and eliminating the expense variance. So anything else beyond that is really going to take some dialogue to look at expanding the revenue. So I just wanted to share that with you as just an observation from the last several months worth of meetings and discussions. The rest of the budget is moving forward as we share with you in the spring. Our intent would be to bring that forward to you at the budget book for adoption in June. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Mr.
I'm sorry,
Could you expand on that just a little bit in the sense of, and I think one of the questions we also had was whether there happens to be an individual surplus at the end of an individual year that we might be able to utilize those dollars to address some of these issues. But understanding that an individual surplus amount at the end of one year doesn't necessarily give us the flexibility to really increase the budget, because you have to have a sustainable amount of money year by year to increase the budget. We just want to make sure we understand the scope of how you do that additional revenue inclusion and a surplus at the end of necessarily address that.
Well, part of what creates a surplus at the end of the year for us has been if we have a positive variance on expenditures, if we spend less than what was budgeted. So we had reinstituted having a 1% buffer within our expense budget. You typically have turnover and some unspent funds within each of the different budgets. It's usually not a lot in each area, but you have 200 different responsibility codes, and so a little bit within each of those. It has to do with open positions and turnover is what really accounts for most of that. So with that buffer built in, the 1%, you would expect to have a 1% variance at the end of the year. Well, with this budget for 2016-17, we're eliminating that. So that goes away. So we're not allowing ourselves any room for an expense buffer at all. That's really there to account for if you have negative variances as well. So if we have negative variances on the expense side, we'll either have to absorb that with hopefully a positive variance on revenue or it will come out of fund balance. On the revenue side, what we had done for as long as I've been in the job, we have not budgeted lag. And so what that means is we have not budgeted the property value growth, because under the funding formula, what happens is the state looks at your prior year value to determine your current year state aid. So if you have property value growth, you're able to retain that growth for 1 year. And then the next year, the state looks at that higher value and they reduce your state aid by a corresponding amount. So if you were to, so that creates a positive variance for us. We've heard quite a bit about that from our community. We've had some folks that have questioned that strategy and that surplus and what that's done for us over the years. What we've done with that is we've moved any surpluses over into capital projects funds, and that's allowed the board to be able to address projects that have come up outside of the bond cycle. And I'm going to digress just a second because I think it speaks to something that we're coming up to here in a minute, the question that we had last week as far as use of those funds. We've had, in the last 4 years, we've spent $42.5 million on campus additions, adding classrooms, 42.5. And that was just deal with enrollment growth. So as far as an appropriate use of capital projects, in my mind, there's no use better than that. Of that $42.5 million, 65% of it was spent in the Lake Collins attendance area, specific to the Lake Collins attendance area. 10.8% was spent in the Berkner area, 8.46% was spent in Richardson area, and 15.6% spent in the Pierce attendance area in the last 4 to 5 years. So those dollars, we've parked those over there for that purpose. We have 2 large projects that will serve the entire district, and again, it's to deal with growth. And when people think of growth, most people think of just the campus. But when we experience growth, our support staff have to grow as well to be able to accommodate those. We typically put those folks last in line to receive anything. So we've got 2 projects. One is our operations center, and that project is probably about 10 years overdue, and that will serve the entire district. That's $26.5 million, and the other is our non-traditional program and professional development expansion, which will serve the entire district, and that's $9.9 million. So as far as appropriate use of those surpluses, I think all of those are, absolutely. What will happen though is we have obligated those surpluses for this year and part of next. What we're doing is we're budgeting into that lag. We're going to budget approximately 1% of that growth. So what that means is every single year we've got to grow by an amount equal to or greater than that. So we are eating into that variance in the 16-17 budget by eliminating the expense buffer of 1% and eliminating 1% of what we call the lag. So to the extent that our property value growth is above that 1%, Certainly it will be for next year, and that will create surplus, and you can budget into that. And so as long as it keeps growing, you're fine. But the first year that it doesn't grow by as much, and you have used those dollars for recurring expenses, you will then you'll have a deficit, and you'll have to reduce the budget. So that's one of the reasons that we've been very reluctant to budget teacher salaries and recurring expenses out of that non-recurring source of funds. Other districts have done it, and then they put themselves on more of a roller coaster from a budget standpoint. And what that does is, in good years, it's fine. But then in bad years, they have RIFs, reductions in force, and lay off hundreds and hundreds of teachers. And that's happened at several area districts, and I don't want to name any names, but you all know who they are. And we've made a conscious effort to not get on that budget roller coaster and try to create that balance. So I know that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's what we've already done, is we're budgeting into that to a certain degree. And we think that budgeting into 1% of that growth is certainly sustainable for this next year, since we're looking at probably about a 3.5% growth in taxable value, and it's even sustainable for the year after that, because even conservatively, we're probably looking at about 2 to 2.5%. When you get beyond that, your crystal ball probably works as well as mine does, and then it starts getting you're going to get closer to that number. And at some point, it will not grow by that much. We've seen that. If you look at the 20-year period, we've seen periods of flat growth, we've seen periods of declining value, and that's when you get hit.
Thank you. Mr. Lynn?
Thank you, Dr. Kuhn. Actually, Mr. Harper just answered one of my major questions, is how long is this model sustainable? I heard 2 years.
Well, we think within the next 2 years, we will exceed 1%. The third year, we think we're going to get closer to that. Now, what will happen is there'll be a legislative session, of course, in 2017. And the thought and the discussion that we had when we discussed the budget, both at the board budget committee level and at the full board a few weeks ago, was the assumption on our part is that it's sustainable for at least 2 years, and then we have session in 2017. We are below the state average on funding per pupil, and if there were additional dollars placed into the system, we would likely be a recipient of those, since we're below the state average. Now, one of the things we also brought up was we used Plano as an example, and I know Mr. Aller spoke about this as well. Plano gets about $1,200 more in funding than our ISD does. Now, that's because of a combination of things, and it goes into that sustainability piece. They budget the lag, first of all. They also have a higher tax rate. They receive about $300, I think is what it was, Mr. Oliver, in just formula funding that they get. The way it's set up, even if we tax at the exact same level, they get about $300 more per weighted student than we do, just within the nuances of the formula. The rest of it has to do with taxing at a higher rate. They have no local optional homestead exemption. We do, but we're frozen as far as our ability to modify that for the next 4 years. And they also tax at the full amount on the operating side allowable by law, which is $1.17. We only tax at $1.04. So that goes back to that notion of, if we want to continue, if we want to expand what we're doing for staff and salaries beyond what's included in the 16-17 amount, we are going to have to look at making that revenue equation larger. But sustainable for the next 2 years for sure, and then the third year, we think it will come in closer to where we'd actually budgeted. So your surplus is going to decline each year for the next several years. 16-17 will be significantly lower than it was this year, because you'll have eliminated 1% on the revenue and the expense side.
And so we'll have a legislative session next year, starting in January. And presumably, at least from everything that I've heard from my colleagues, is that the Supreme Court will probably issue its ruling later this fall, and that the legislature will take up school finance as one of their major issues. At least that's what I've heard.
That is our understanding as well.
So I think it's important to note, we're talking about a 2-year budget cycle. That's exactly what the state operates under, is a 2-year budget cycle. So I think it's important that everybody understands that, we do receive state funding, and I would like to have a longer-term budget, but since the state only budgets 2 years in a row, or for 2 years, then, it's incumbent upon us to react to what the state's doing. So with that said, I just want to say that I'm encouraged by the budget. I like the changes. I do hope that we do get some more insight next spring. And because I think that with the changes that we're talking about with reading specialists on campus, and I want those to be sustainable. I think they're needed and they're necessary to get our kids where they need to be. So with that, thank you.
I think that's an important point, Mr. Lynn, but it's also important to remember that just because we get a positive ruling from the Supreme Court, that ruling will only state what they believe is necessary to change the system. It will not have a financial component in it. The financial component comes from the legislature and from the appropriation cycle. And everything we're hearing is that because of the cost of oil and some of those issues, that there will be very little additional dollars at the state level in the coming next legislature. So even though we may get a ruling from the Supreme Court that says we need X amount of things to happen to make the system equitable and sustainable, and there may not be dollars at the state level to physically make that happen. So we can't count on that from a standpoint, from a financial standpoint, that we may get that relief from the state.
Any other comments, colleagues, questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Harper. We have been at it now for about an hour and a half. I would like to propose a 5-minute break. It is 7:36. We will be back at 7:40. I acknowledge City Councilman Adam Yu was here previously. He had to leave, unfortunately, because his son had schoolwork that he had to do this evening, but we want to acknowledge the fact that he was here and appreciate his interest in this discussion. It's so vital to the part of the community that he represents. So we've had some ongoing discussions and bond presentations, and the Lake Highlands Enrollment Growth Reflector Committee has met during the last meeting. And Dr. Stone, if you would like to update us on this.
Yes, I will start out, before I start my presentation, as an update on the Lake Highlands Reflector Committee. I am going to ask Kara Altman if she will just give us an update on some other issues related to Bond 2016.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. As we get started, we're going to have a quick look at the Bond 2016 website. And I do want to mention that we have so far this spring held a total of 16 bond meetings, informational meetings, with our last big feeder pattern meeting happening in the Berkner area at Yale Elementary on Thursday evening at 6:30. So we are very excited about this and just want the community to know that anybody is welcome at those meetings. We will have Spanish translation available. So if you haven't been able to make one of the meetings yet but would like to see the information live for yourself, you are welcome to do that. So without further ado, I would direct your attention up to the big screen, and I'll take you on a quick show and tell of the bond website. So, Ms. Hayes, if you'll click on resources, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things there in the top bar. Okay, so here we have a couple of things I'd like to just quickly show you if you want to click on the FAQs. We have updated these throughout the fall and now this spring, and we'll continue to do so as we get questions either at meetings or as they come in. We just keep feeding that information onto our website. So if you'll click back, I just want to show them one more thing in resources. Okay, so if you will click on summary and detail sheets, third one down. There you go. Okay, this is a sheet that should look pretty familiar to everyone. It's been shown by Mr. Hawkerroad throughout this process, and just wanted to note to everyone that it is available And Sandra, if you scroll down a few pages, you'll see there's some detail sheets behind that, publicly available for people who may want a more granular view of what is proposed. So with that, we will click to projects by campus. There you go. If you will go to Pierce High School in the left drop-down menu, just want to show you, okay, and scroll down. So you have a comparison list there of things that were taken care of through Bond 2011, and you can also see a list of items that are proposed for Bond 2016. That was a very popular feature from the last bond election that was carried over by popular request. Additionally, if you have a campus website that you like to visit, Yale Elementary or any of the other 54 campuses, you will see a PDF downloadable flyer with specific improvements that are proposed as part of Bond 2016. If you'll click back to the main page. Thank you. Our video is right there, front and center, and then we do have some summary information as well as information about how to find voting locations that are convenient in terms of early voting and then actual voting day of May the 7th. Some other pertinent information to consider about voting, and then some summary information there as well. Do you all have any questions?
Really great, Kara. Good job.
Well, thank you on behalf of the team.
Madam President, welcome first of all. But I'm going to have a moment of personal privilege for a second.
Yes, you may.
I just want to say that the amount of time and energy that this collective senior administration team has put into being engaged and involved in these meetings, between their other duties across the district and these bond meetings. I know it's 3 nights this week. It was 4 nights last week. It was 4 nights the week before. It's just an incredible set of commitment and responsibility and weight that you're carrying by being here every day, all day long, doing your day jobs, doing this in addition to that, in spite of your house getting practically blown away, for the other things that have happened across the district. And I just want you to know on behalf of the board and our community, we thank you so much for all that you put into it. I don't know how you're still standing and doing your jobs every day, all day long, considering how much time and energy and the 15 and 16-hour days, day after day.
Thank you, Mrs. Greenhall, and that is a great segue to our next item on the agenda, which is an information item about the bond planning and student enrollment growth update. Since our last meeting, we've had several bond information presentations, and we've also had the Lake Highlands Enrollment Growth Reflector Committee has also met, so at this time we're going to ask Dr. Stone to please give us an update.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Caston, and welcome home. I do have an update tonight to bring to you as the facilitator, the person who led the Lake Highlands Reflector Committee. Several people around the horseshoe to attend each one of the meetings, and I've also asked them to join me at different times to share different information about the committee. Tonight, I'm going to kind of frame my comments about the update from the process of the committee around 4 central topics. One would be just to open with some celebrations that I'd like to share. I want to give an overview of the committee's work, the 6 meetings that we had beginning back on March 1st, an outcome of the committee's work, and what the committee ended up with last Tuesday night in terms of what they charged me to bring forward to you tonight. And then we'll talk about some next steps and a timeline. So, around the topic of celebrations, this was a great opportunity to work with the entire Richardson ISD community. Primarily, the largest portion of that was with the Lake Highlands community, and I really want to talk about the commitment of this community. We started out with 48 members. There were different amounts of people that were there at each one of the meetings, but by and large, they all attended the meetings very consistently, and the level of commitment that was displayed, the level of passion that this community has for our schools and for the district and for the students was evident, and it was great to experience them along, that along with them. The work of the committee, they worked, again, 6 weeks, and it's not just attending, you know, a meeting, showing up and attending a meeting for 2 hours and then going home. I mean, they had homework to do each time. They worked on their own in groups, lots of conversation. It was a big show of work on the part of this committee, and I think that you're going to hear that we're really proud of the work that the committee did. The trust that was built on the part of the committee and the community, I can't say enough about. We started out, you know, establishing this group. We all came together as just individuals, and I think by the end of it that we established a real level of collaboration and trust that was evident in every single one of the meetings, and it just grew, and it felt really good. And by the end of the meeting, everyone was commenting about that, and that they hoped that that level of trust would continue, and that working together as a community would continue. The process that we went through, I'll take you through in just a few minutes, but I think that you'll see that it worked. And it's evident by the fact that at the last bullet there is my final celebration, that we do have a path forward, that we can now go from the work of the committee and we bring it to you, and now we can move forward with their recommendation. And that is nice to be in this place. So to start out in terms of the next talking point, which was about the work of the committee, I want to just let you know that everything was centered around our vision. We're all students learn, grow, and succeed. And if you attended, a couple of you were not able to attend several of you were at several of the meetings. You know that we put a chair in the center of the room at each one of the meetings, and the focus was that that chair represented all students. And so every meeting that was there, and it was to remind everyone about our district vision, and our work is centered around all students learning, growing, and succeeding. So I want to just take you through just an update. This was a roadmap that each week that we met, it would come up and we would show where we were, and then we would show and talk about the work that we've done and where we're going. So I just want to kind of walk you through each one of the meetings just pretty quickly and let you know how we got from the beginning to the end. On March 1st, as you might recall, we all came together, and really the message of that meeting was everything is on the table. Everything that anyone wants to bring to the committee for consideration, bring it. And so at that meeting, we started out with 14 different options. And I thought it might be helpful for me just to review for you what those options were when we started. We had on the list to build a new K-6 campus, to build a new K-6 magnet campus, to build a 6th grade school, a 6th grade center, to build a 5th and 6th grade campus, add 6th grade to all junior highs, build a new junior high with a 6th grade added, add on to existing campuses that as a standalone option just to add on, utilize portables. We talked about different grade configurations, create a 5th and 6th grade center and a 7th and 8th grade center out of the current junior highs, add magnet offerings to existing campus, add 5th and 6th grade to existing junior highs and call them middle schools, add 6th grade to junior highs only in Lake Highlands, and lease space for short-term basis rather than permanent construction. So at that first meeting, all of those ideas were on the table, and so we had a lot of work to do, and I was a little bit nervous that that was going to take some time to get that narrowed down. But as we continued on to the second meeting, March 15th, we really began to synthesize the pros and cons. And the way that we did that was over spring break, every one of the committee members did a big homework assignment where they themselves analyzed the pros and cons of each one of those options and really just came to the table with what they wanted to add in terms of that. So we came to the meeting March 15th, and we did a synthesis of activity where all of the members worked together to do a kind of a presentation gallery walk. At the end of that meeting, we took a vote, and at the end of that meeting, we were at 9 options. When we moved into March 22nd, we continued to work, research, brainstorm, and we put the groups, members in groups where they worked together on presentations that they brought together on March 29th. And in between that time, they worked and brought some of the greatest presentations. They really worked so hard. And they came together on March 29th, made those presentations that allowed by the end of that night for us to be narrowed down to where we were at 4 different options. So we went from 14 to 4 by the time we got to those meetings. On April 5th, we had a deep discussion about those options, and on April 12th, even deeper discussions about those options. So I wanted to just take you through that roadmap. So for those of you that didn't know how we got from 14 to ultimately 4, which then was narrowed down to 2 options that were standalone options and 2 options that are secondary or supplemental options that I will show you here in just a second. So that was the process of the work. Any questions about that part? You all have worked and walked along with us all and so this is not a lot of new information. But just as a reminder, this was something that the board charged us with all along the way to keep in terms of our guiding factors, to keep in mind at all times the instructional implications, the neighborhood schools concept, to maintain diverse represented demographics, fiscal responsibility, effective operations, safety and security, and to come up with a solution that would provide for future flexibility. Lots of conversation throughout the process. These were constantly cycling back into questions about are these guiding factors being maintained in the options that we're discussing. So I want to talk about then the outcome of the committee's work. You can see how we did get to narrow down to where we were at 2 options that I'm going to talk to you about tonight, and then some other supplemental considerations. And I want to stop here and I want to just tell you how important it is for me to convey the work of the committee. I'm not here to share what I think or what I want, or I'm here to convey as openly and honestly as I can what the committee wants me to share. And the others around the horseshoe who attended I want you to hold to be accountable to that. Toward the end, I'm going to ask if there's anything that you think that needs to be said, so I want you to keep that in mind. So 2 options, and we've talked about this, but I want to remind you that they are option 1, to build a new K-6 elementary school, and option 2, that the committee felt strongly about keeping on the table, is to build 2 5th and 6th grade campuses on the current sites of Lake Highlands Junior High and Forest Meadow Junior High. So those 2 options are the options that the committee brought forward to you in terms of recommendation. And I wanted to, I clipped this out of off the website that shows that at the end of the last meeting, we had the committee members to do a vote and to choose the option that they felt best served as the long-term solution. And you can see the percentages there on the screen. And what I said to the committee at the very beginning at the meeting, and then at the end of the meeting, is that this is not, we're not going to have winners and losers. And this is not going to be, at the end of the day, if we don't land on one decision, this is not that we have winners or losers, or we have 2 sides, or that we have a committee divided. What I'm going to convey to the Board of Trustees is that the committee felt strongly about these 2 options. And so they felt strongly enough that they wanted these 2 options to move forward. So when I talked about that path forward, I'm talking about the fact that the committee wanted us to bring to you that these 2 options are 2 options that they felt strongly about. And you can see those percentages. So I'm going to talk then a little bit just to give you some information about how the committee felt about these 2 options. The first one being build a new K-6 elementary school. And I'm going to frame that in terms of some of the potential advantages and disadvantages that they see to these solutions. So to this solution, first of all, is some potential advantages. They felt that the new K-6 elementary school was obviously consistent with the current model of our ISD. You know that we have K-6 schools. It supports the neighborhood schools, that students attend school for 7 years without a transition. And I will tell you that there wasn't a whole lot of talk about the advantages of the K-6 elementary school in terms of specific points, because other than that they like our K-6 elementary schools. That was kind of it. Everybody gets that. We like that. Everybody, ideally, you know, that everyone likes that one. And so, but there were some potential disadvantages to this solution, and we're going to have a little more discussion about this slide. Because I know that the committee would want us to have some conversation about this slide, because this really was most of the conversation about this idea. Some potential disadvantages were that available land is limited and may not be an ideal location. So we're going to talk to you tonight about location, because I will tell you, they talked about location, location, location. And then the second big point that was constantly surfacing around this idea was that it would require a change of attendance boundaries, and obviously some concerns. So if this was the solution that the board ultimately went with, these are two potential concerns that I know that the committee would want us to have some conversation about. So I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to ask, first of all, Mr. Harper to just give an update, first of all, on that available land, and just the whole idea about the parcel of land that we've purchased, and then what other available sites that there are for us to build a new elementary school. Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. If you remember last year, we had a market study done for the area that we were having the highest amount of growth in Lake Highlands specifically, and that's a corridor that really runs just immediately to the east of Skillman, and running from all the way from our southern border up through to about Skyview. It's really the White Rock attendance area. That's the kind of the epicenter of where we've had the highest amount of enrollment growth. And so we focused on that particular area for our first round of property reviews, and we actually were able to acquire a property. None of those were ideal, by the way. Each one of the properties that we looked at had pros and cons with them. Some were larger, some were smaller. But as far as trying to get within that particular zone, we actually had the opportunity that Mr. Bono brought to our attention about a property that we thought was under contract, that deal had fallen through, and we were able to move fairly quickly on that, and that's the Lake Highlands Office Center at White Rock Trail and Walnut Hill. So available land is very limited unless you're going to eminent domain property. There's just simply not a lot that's for sale that would be a better location. We did consider property within the Lake Highlands town center, but there are parcels that are divided by the creek and by the thoroughfare there that make each of those parcels either equal to or smaller, or about the same size as the property you end up buying, at a significant premium on price. The biggest concern we had there was the proximity to the DART station and the amount of both foot traffic and vehicular traffic that was coming through that area, and our ability to be able to secure it was a concern there. So as far as land that we currently have available to be able to build on, certainly would be the 4.6 acres, 4.57 acres we own at Walnut Hill and White Rock Trail. And then plus what the committee discussed is the ability, we have sufficient land located at both Lake Highlands Junior High property that we already own and Forest Meadow Junior High property that we already own that would be large enough to be able to build a campus on.
And then if you will talk to us about some of the things that you shared about the impact on attendance boundaries.
One of the charges, and several committee members reminded us repeatedly about that the committee was not charged with determining what the change in attendance boundaries would include. I think there were many that really wanted to discuss that. I mean, because that's really the question is, if you're going to vote for that, a lot of it would depend on what impact on attendance boundaries. They wanted to know that. Where would the school be located? How impactful would those attendance boundary changes be? But they kept coming back to the charge was to determine the option to address and not so much the how it will be implemented. The committee at our last meeting, we discussed everything from, one of the committee members had thrown a proposal out to the entire group that involved changing attendance boundaries for 5 elementary schools, I believe, Dr. Stone?
Yes, sir.
Within the Lake Highlands Junior High, and actually bleeding over a little bit into Merriman Park. Would be the only one that would be outside of Lake Highlands Junior High attendance area that would be affected, but 5 campuses will be affected by the change. The committee had questions about, how many campuses could be impacted or would be impacted. So we discussed other options with them, that it could be that you impact just a single campus if you build an elementary school. And so we discussed how would that work? How could you just touch one? And so we used the example of, since the growth is concentrated at White Rock Elementary, you should simply build a school within that attendance boundary and split that attendance boundary, or look at having an intermediate or primary grade option and affect just the single attendance boundary as an option. And then we looked at everything going up to affecting 2. The next highest growth is Wallace. And so what could you do? How could you configure that where you could affect just those 2 areas without affecting all the other attendance boundaries in the area? So we talked about that, and then all the way up through the 5 that was submitted by one of the members. So there are lots of options for you to consider. And we did discuss the fact that the administration and the board has been very sensitive to this, and we've tried to avoid wholesale changes coming in and putting a new school in the middle and redrawing all the boundaries just to make it fit. That's not been our intent. So I hope that covers the items that you want to.
And we'll go back and talk about this. I'll go on and I'll talk about the other options, and then we're going to have time to answer all of your questions. Option 2 was to build the 2 5th and 6th grade campuses on the current sites of Lake Highlands Junior High and Forest Meadows Junior High. And so here's some potential advantages to this option. Obviously, a big one was it wouldn't require attendance changes. The existing attendance boundaries to change. You wouldn't have to buy new land because you'd be building them on the junior high sites, and it would reduce the enrollment of every elementary school in the feeder pattern. So those were some of the advantages the committee came up with, and then some potential disadvantages to this solution. It would be a departure from the K-6 model, which we can talk about. It would create an additional transition for students, eliminate leadership opportunities for the 5th and 6th graders, could result in some underutilized elementary schools. It could have an impact on accountability, and larger peer group setting at an earlier age was a concern for the community members who were parents in particular. So those were some of the potential disadvantages to the solution, and we can talk to you about any questions that you might have about that in just a minute. So some supplemental options just to add into the equation that the committee wanted to bring forward would be that we could still build on to existing campuses if needed. The committee did not want us to end the conversation about potentially transforming one of our schools in Lake Highlands into a magnet campus, and the one in particular that they would, I'm sure we want me to bring forward because it was the topic of all of the conversation, was North Lake Elementary, whose principal's in the back of the room. Hello, Mary. And then the last supplemental option or consideration that we took a vote on, and this was unanimous in support, that they would utilize portables, but only on a temporary basis. It wasn't that we want to just start adding portables to all the campuses to address enrollment growth and move on. So those were other supplemental options. So I did want to point out, though, that each week we did put the meeting summaries up, and in particular, I know that many of you read this over the weekend in preparation for this meeting, but you can see on the screen as I scroll through, all of the comments are captured there of every single committee members' individual thoughts about all of these options. How important is that we have this record of every single thought that was captured? And as we move forward in our work, we have this to look back on and reflect on and make sure that every committee member's thoughts were heard. So as I just scroll through you can just see all of those committee members' ideas captured that will move forward as we progress in the planning. So next steps and timeline, I would tell you that I want to take you back to the very first document that I presented back in February. It was February 15th when I first proposed working and putting this committee together. And at that meeting, you can see, this was the screenshot from that meeting, I talked about surveying the Lake Highlands community then. And wasn't sure when in the process that it would be a good time to do that. Originally, I thought that we might survey earlier on, but because we had so many options, it would have just been all over the place instead of in terms of a survey. So we decided early on that we would wait to survey until we really narrowed down an option that we would survey the community about. So here is where we're going with that. We're planning to deploy a survey tomorrow to the entire district that would really have just 5 questions on it. Have had a lot of conversation about this survey. Originally it was really long. It could take a long time for you to answer. We've narrowed it down to where it would look something like this. So I've taken some screenshots of the actual survey. We're going to deploy it from another vehicle, but this is exactly what it's going to sound and look like. But I'm open to your comments and your talk about this. So it would begin just introduction there about what the survey is. Then we would ask the person completing the survey to tell what best describes them so we can identify, and that will also allow us to disaggregate and break the data down. We'll ask them to best describe the elementary attendance area that they live, work, or their children attend. So we'll be able to get every single, across the entire district, so all the elementary schools that are actually in Lake Highlands, we'll be able to break those down. And then we'll also be able to break them down by the feeder patterns from across the entire district. Then we'll be asking just really 3 questions on top of that. And the first one is about the K-6 elementary school, that if this was the solution that was taken forward and the creation of the attendance boundaries for the new school would therefore impact the attendance boundaries of some of the current schools, could they support construction of a K-6 elementary school? Were they unsure, or could they not support construction of the new K-6 elementary school? The next question would be around the 5th and 6th grade centers on the junior high sites, and you can see basically the same question, kind of breaks it down what that would mean, and then could they support it, not sure, or could not support that. And then the last question would just be, let's see where you are on the 2 options and taking a feel of both of those options. So this would be then the plan. We would deploy that survey, keep the survey open. We're looking, and I want to talk to y'all about the timeline of that in just a second. We looked to come back together and schedule some board work sessions where we will bring all of this together. You'll have time to look at all of the community feedback if you haven't had time to do so. And we're going to just continue to work. And then our goal will be that we will develop a long-term plan and see how many of these options are involved in that. So let me get to this next question, because I want to make sure, because this was important, because I committed to the committee that I will be the voice of the committee, but I'm not going to sell anything. I'm just going to share with you and tell you where we got to with this committee. So I want to go around if there's anything that anyone who attended all the meetings would share. What else would the committee want the board to know that maybe I haven't shared?
I have a couple that I want to emphasize again that location is the key for the vast majority of the committee members. It is a big concern for them. I think one of the other things to add is, in addition to building a new K-6 school, they also discussed the option of maybe needing more than one school built over the long term. They were wanting to make sure that whatever solution is developed, that it truly does address the problem, that it is long-term, and that we still have flexibility down the road. So considering more than one campus being built was definitely part of the discussion. I think there was quite a lot of discussion on diversity and how any solution really helps us embrace the diversity that our district encompasses, and making sure that we keep that in mind, that we all keep that in mind moving forward. And I think ultimately what I would say is everyone was able to share their perspective and their opinion, and even if one person had an alternate opinion, they were able to voice that. The group was very much aware of everyone's perspective on the solutions, on the situation, agree or disagree. It really was something that was heard, and I think that's something that the committee also very much valued.
Dr. Stone, I would just like to add two pieces. One, the student voice on the committee was incredibly powerful. Oftentimes, it was their insight, their perspective, their wisdom. As sometimes we fail to forget that even at 17 and 18 years old, there's a wisdom that they have in seeing the world from this fresh perspective, that they were often able to push the conversation forward. And they were able to help the adults sometimes get out of the quagmire of whatever that topic was and propel us forward. So I thank Dr. Stone and the board for including our students in the voice, because they really were profound. In addition, I would just like to echo that one of the constant things I heard as the committee was really looking at the 5th and 6th grade options, was that they were very strong in their recommendation that if we built it at one junior high, we needed to build it at the other junior high. And that to just build a 5th, 6th grade option, for example, at Forest Meadow, and not have that also at Lake Highlands Junior High is not something that the committee felt like would be in the best interest of students. Would be, if you think about our instructional implications, and we look at those, that would be something that they would not be in support of. My last thing I said too, I lied, it's one more. The instructional implications that you gave to the committee were critical in helping us really calibrate what those things meant and how important each of those played in the decision. So we had long conversations about truly what is a neighborhood school concept, and why we came in potentially with 38, 40 different definitions we left with, and whether or not we necessarily agreed and we liked the definition, but we left with a common definition to allow that to inform the decisions and the recommendations that we made. So I thought that was really critical to the work.
Mr. Harper, do you have anything that you would say would be a critical takeaway?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about it on available land and location and impact on attendance boundaries. Those were recurring themes. I mean, just to echo what Dr. Goodson and Dr. Brandon mentioned on that would be all I think I would have to add.
Okay. So I know you have a lot of questions, and so we're going to open this up now for us to just have comments and talk about these options.
Okay, so Dr. Stone, going back, first of all, thank you for the presentation and the organization of this. This has given us a great roadmap to work tonight. As far as debriefing the conversation tonight, would you like to start with the two options and allow an opportunity for board members to comment or ask questions about each one as a standalone?
Sure, that would be a great idea. So let's start and frame the conversation moving forward first about the new K-6 option. What questions that you might have about the advantages, disadvantages, or anything further that you would want us to find out as we move into the next phase of our work.
Okay, so board members, let me just say this up front. This is a work session for us, so it's more conversational than it is formal. So I'm going to just open up the mic for y'all and feel free to ask questions or make comments or observations as they come to mind.
I've got some questions, and so we're talking K-6 right now, but some of my questions are contrasting the options. So one of the things I would like to know, and we can either talk about it tonight or I know we're trying to schedule a meeting for next week, is just, so the notion of building a K-6 school at one of the junior highs, it doesn't seem as though either of those locations would be ideal in terms of affecting the area where we're having the most trouble. Is that an accurate assessment? For a K-6 school, I'm talking.
Well, the Lake Collins Junior High, I mean, it would be within the Lake Collins Junior High feeder patterns where we're having, the highest amount of growth. So if you build it on the Lake Collins Junior High campus, no, it's not ideal, because it's not, you're going to have to alter.
You'd have to shift effectively.
You would.
Right. A lot of districts between there and White Rock.
A lot of attendance areas between there and White Rock, yes.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that, because that was my thought when I heard that notion. I may have seen these numbers, but I couldn't recall them offhand, but construction costs, just generally speaking, for a K-6 versus what's being contemplated for a 5-6, and I guess in this case it would be 2 5-6s, so construction costs for that option versus, I guess for now, just one K-6 school.
Of course, just to build the building. And I'm going to give you a range because, it's like how much does a car cost? Depends on what kind of car you want. Somewhere between, the figure we use for the committee is somewhere between $23 and $26 million for a K-6 or like campus like that. When they talked about the notion of 5th and 6th grade center, they discussed whether that would be constructed using a secondary delivery model or an elementary delivery model. And the cost to do that on using an elementary delivery model would basically be the same as building a K-6 school. So when we say K-6, I mean, it can be whatever grade configurations within K-6 that you want. It could be 5th, 6th, it could be K-6, it could be K2, K3, whatever. As long as it's that elementary model, it's still going to be in that $23 to $26 million range per site, and that excludes land. If you were to go with a secondary model, that number jumps to, I believe it was between $46 and $50 million per site if you use a secondary delivery model there. And the reason for the premium is you're going to build the athletic facilities, the fine art facilities, all of those things, the science labs. You're going to build it like you're building a junior high.
Okay. I guess that kind of, for me, brings up the question of how do we, we're trying to get, there's lots of moving pieces here. We're trying to eliminate as many variables as possible. So when it comes to something like that, where you're talking about a 5-6 and secondary elementary model, is that something that the administration is going to recommend if you did build it? This is the model we would use, or because I'm just trying to figure out how do we make this decision. So we have to get to some set of assumptions here to be able to make that decision. So can you talk a little bit about how, I guess it's a broader question about how we get to a decision on this. So.
Well, it's going to be, obviously, and I know that Mr. Bono has said this a number of times, if this were an easy decision, we would know what we were going to do a long time ago. It would have appeared, it would have, built itself to us, obviously, already. I think we're going to have to go and get around the table and to look at locations and implications and see what we want to do in terms of boundary changes and what it will mean for cost and what it's going to mean for some of these other. We're going to have to just weigh out both of these options in terms of looking at which one that the board feels is the best option for for the entire district. And I think that's just going to have to be with more of an in-depth conversation, looking at accountability of data, looking at numbers, looking at costs, looking at all of those things, and really ultimately landing on the decision.
Right. But I think, So there's a lot of those kinds of questions that I have and that I'm sure you have too, about what's best instructionally. I mean, that's the number one thing, right? But then what are the construction costs? What are the ongoing operating costs for the 5-6 model versus the K-6 model? I realize we can't answer all those tonight, but those are some of the top of mind things that I have in terms of how we approach this. Last question I have, then I'll yield. I've got some more, but I don't want to hog the mic. But you talked a little bit about impacts on accountability. Can you just talk a little bit more about that so that we understand what we're talking about there?
Yes. So the impact on accountability is such that if we were to pull out the 5th and 6th grade and have them as separate campuses, the 5th and 6th grade campuses would be fine. Those 5th and 6th grade campuses in terms of accountability would just be fine. Because typically, and well, traditionally, historically, our 5th and 6th grade scores really pull up our elementary school campuses for a number of reasons. One being that 5th graders have a second attempt to take the reading and math portions of the test. It's the SSI initiative, or Student Success Initiative, that the state allows all 5th graders that do not pass to have a second attempt. And so by the time that those 5th graders have taken that second attempt, those scores are really, really high. That brings up the campus in terms of when you're looking at all students passing for Index 1. So that is one reason. So the 5th and 6th grade campuses would be fine. The 3rd and 4th grade campuses would be a big concern. We've looked at some of the campuses in Lake Collins, and some of our campuses would be a big concern if you pulled out their 5th and 6th grade scores. And so we do have some big concerns, and we do have to look at that because, and our principals look at that, we had a lot of conversations about that. So one of the things that I would like to do as we move forward into the next work session is to take last year's accountability data and run some reports to see how those campuses in Lake Collins would have fared last year if they didn't have their 5th and 6th grade scores factored into their accountability ratings. So that would be one thing we would look at. I don't know if y'all have other comments that you would make, but that's my first attempt at that answer.
Dr. Stone, would you just clarify that then? So the way that a school would be responsible to the state academically, or I'm not sure that's how you say it, but is determined by us when we create that site. So I mean, if we actually create a 5th and 6th grade center, then we are designating that as a campus that would be rated separately.
That's correct.
So there's not a way, for example, to rate them together somehow?
No.
Okay.
They would have their own individual principal, their own PEBS number. They would be an individual campus. Yeah.
I had one question I just wanted to build off of Mr. Oliver's is the difference between the elementary model and the secondary model. Is there an instructional difference as well?
And there was a lot of conversation about that. I'm going to kick that to Dr. Goodson and talk about how, we talked about both of those in terms of whether or not the 5th and 6th grade would be more toward the secondary, junior high, or elementary. You want to talk some about the conversation?
Sure. The committee, I think, we had little breakout sessions where Brenda and I kind of facilitated a conversation regarding the 5th and 6th grade center. And then part of that discussion revolved around, okay, if there was a secondary model, then we would, the students would have different types of opportunities. And I think their thinking was going toward the elective part of the schedule. By talking about an elementary schedule, they liked the fact that you had a homeroom teacher. At most, you may switch 1 or 2 times in a departmentalized situation where you have a reading language arts teacher, math, science, and possibly another content area. The committee members that we heard from had mixed emotions about both. I don't know if there was one definitive perspective on which one they thought was better. I think for every opinion that shared, okay, I want my child to have that extended elementary experience. I want them to stay connected with their learning in a different way. I want them to have that homeroom setting. I don't want to go to that secondary model just yet. We also heard from parents that said, you know what, they're going to have to experience a transition anyway. That they're resilient. If it provides different opportunities for them earlier, why not give that a shot as well? I think for the purposes of our conversation, we focus on it being an elementary model, elementary instructional model, just so that they could kind of wrap their thinking around it. So I think ultimately, again, it just depends on the person who is sharing their opinion, very different perspectives.
And if I could add to that, because I did have the opportunity to go and observe one of the meetings, to add on to what Tabitha had shared earlier about the student voice, the students were unequivocal about the fact that they did not want to have a secondary model if it moved to a 5th and 6th grade. They absolutely felt like it was way more beneficial to stick with an elementary school model. And on top of that, I don't know where they ended up in the last meeting because I wasn't able to attend that one, but they didn't actually think 5th and 6th was a very good idea. And that was coming from our students. And one of our students had actually gone to school in another district where he left our elementary school model and went to a 5th, 6th model and came back to RISD for 6th grade because he did not like it. It was not a fit for him. So just to put that into the information flow as we're considering this, if we really want to honor that student voice, that's what I heard loud and clear. I don't know, Jean, Justin, you guys were there as well.
As long as we're doing some comparisons, we talked about the difference in construction costs between the two models. Can we talk about the difference between the maintenance and operation costs of operating, if there is a significant difference of operating those two facilities? Mr. Harper, I'm looking at you.
I knew you were. I was trying to. I mean, yes, there is a significant operating cost differential. You have a more efficient delivery model with an elementary model than you do a secondary, simply because they teach 6 to 7 periods as opposed to 5 to 7. So that alone creates a fairly significant differential. If you go with a secondary model, you're going to create the master schedule. If you do it at the elementary level, it's not the same, where you have 7 courses and you choose from that, and then you create some inefficiencies with that as opposed to a second model of 22-1, or for 5th and 6th grade we use 28-1. That's a more efficient delivery model. I'm not trying to say it's better academically, it is more efficient. So yes, there is a differential in the operational costs. It will be higher on the secondary model as opposed to elementary. I can't tell you exactly what that would be, but at this point we can calculate that out, and it will be fairly significant.
Well, I know when we went through the process of realigning the high schools and moving the 9th graders to the high school model, that helped us from an efficiency standpoint with classes that were offered in both environments, that to teachers at health and some of the electives and things that we had to offer in the junior high model versus we had to offer also at the high school. Is there any difference, is there any relationship to that in that if in a 5th and 6th grade model we would have some duplication of things that we were offering in that versus things that we offer in the junior high model that's not very efficient, that we have to have teachers doing some of the same types of things?
Really, about the only one that comes to mind has to do with fine arts, because what will happen right now for band, orchestra, I'm not sure for choir as much, but certainly for band and orchestra, what happens is the directors have to travel to each of the elementary schools within their respective feeder patterns, so it is a less efficient model than if you had all of those students at a single location. You would create some efficiencies there and be able to actually reduce staff at the fine arts side. But that, I think, would be one of the few examples where you would have courses that go down into the elementary ranks that you're going to create an efficiency with.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was just, I know one of the, we're comparing these two, but in terms of location, I know it was a big emphasis for the committee, and I know the status of the land at White Rock Trail and Walnut Hill, is that final? I mean, we own that property?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and just so I have a good understanding, the parcel that you mentioned earlier, that was closest to the DART station, when we talked about that at a different time, there were some issues, I believe, with ingress and egress. Not just cost, but it was getting students in and out of that particular parcel. Am I remembering correctly?
Well, it has a, the traffic flow would be better because you've got the east-west egress would take you out to Skillman, and it would, but now you'd only be able to go north when you exit. The north-south egress from that parcel, which I think that is Wildcat Way, that takes you down to Walnut Hill, and it has a controlled access there. So both ways dump out onto a 6-lane, 4 to 6 lane controlled access road. But as far as pulling parents away from the school quicker, you have a longer queue to be able to do that. So from that standpoint, it would be a stronger location. The concern we have is you don't really get, the parcel we bought is 4.57 acres. The parcel at Lake Highlands Town Center was 4.61 acres. So you really don't gain any meaningful space there. In some respects, it actually, the topography on that land, I know a lot of people have concern about the Lake Highlands Office Center land being on a hill. That actually could be used to our advantage compared to the flat parcel in the town center, building into the hill. And but the biggest concern there was you didn't gain anything on size at all, and you trade having the queue coming out on the White Rock Trail, which is a 2-lane road. You trade that for close proximity to the DART station, and when we reviewed that property on multiple times, there's a considerable amount of foot traffic there from the DART, and that would be a concern. So securing the property and securing the students there there was a concern for us.
I believe there's a sizable parking area for the DART station as well.
There is.
So, okay. I think that's all I have at this time. Like Mr. Albright, I don't want to hog the mic, but I do have other questions. So when we get to those points, I will chime in.
If I recall, when I was in the last meeting, do you have the raw numbers of that kind of community survey between the two? As I recall, that's like 21 to 18 or something like that, right? Am I remembering those raw numbers? So, I mean, can you, Dr. Stone, kind of characterize where the community left that as they left the meeting? I mean, obviously it's, if this was a presidential election, it looks like a landslide, but I think it begs to be provided a little more detail on kind of where the head of the community was at as they left that.
Yes, and I'll let anyone else who was in the room weigh in. I mean, I can't stress enough that I think a lot of people would vote for the K-6 school if they knew where it was going to be located. And there's just a lot of concern about the location. So I think because of that fear and concern, a lot of people talked about going with the 5th and 6th grade center because it felt safer, because there is such a concern about us changing attendance boundaries and dividing up the Lake Highlands community. I think that, I can't overstate that that's just how they really feel. So that was something that really was just very pervasive in the room. Share other people, you want to share other things that you would say about how this collectively you think that the group was feeling?
I think you stated it perfectly. I think it's not a landslide by any stretch. I think so many of the members are uncomfortable with the ambiguity of the location, and it concerns them greatly, and I think we would be understating it if we didn't say it exactly that way. They really, they know where the 5th and 6th grade centers would be, and I think for some that was a deciding factor, and that's what caused them to vote the way they did.
Okay. And Mr. Park Road, a couple things for you. I know when in some of the meetings we had, obviously for them to consider building 5 and 6 centers, you guys had done an assessment to determine that they would actually fit on that property. So my question is really, how does that impact both of those properties relative to current parking, tennis courts, football fields, soccer fields, tracks, et cetera, and what does the revised footprint roughly look like with both of those items there?
We just talked in terms of, is there appropriate land, is there enough land there? So you have about, I want to say it's just under 5 acres that would be available at the Lake College Junior High site, but now that would involve displacing the current tennis courts, but it would not impact the track or any other aspect to the building. But there's that much raw, just open land on the, that would be the east side of the building. Forest Meadow, more options, there's a little more green space there. The issue there would be trying to be able to provide entrance egress to its fairly long queue, trying to pull it to the front. It would have to front Abrams. There would be about the only way that would work. And so I think there's actually a little bit more green space at Forest Meadow that would be available for us. But the first one would be Lake College Junior High for sure. If you were staging them, I know the community indicated an expression of wanting to do 2, but they also talked about phasing that in. So the first round would be Lake College Junior High, because that's where we're having the highest concentration of growth and the most campuses that are impacted. And then consider Forest Meadow either at the end of this bond, bridging over into this next bond would be an option, or completely in the second bond, in the next bond.
Okay, and then I guess my next question is a comment on land, which I think we basically told the community, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but obviously we're continuing to keep options open. We obviously own a piece of property, and we've looked at how things might work at the junior highs, but obviously we're still beating the streets and looking for other opportunities that might be a better fit. So
we are.
Okay. And then Dr. Stone, I guess, is it fair to say, I mean, as I looked at the K through 6 part of the presentation, and then go into the 5, 6, is it fair to say that while they're not listed as positives, some of the negatives relative to a 5, 6, i.e., accountability, departure from K6 model, leadership opportunity, loss of leadership. So some of those things that are listed as negatives there should also be considered positives relative to a K6, and how did that discussion go with
I think that would certainly be a fair way to look at that, because those were some of the things that when they're comparing the 5th and 6th grade, they're comparing them to the K6 campus, and so that would be what they would lose from the moving away from the K6 campus. So I think that would be obvious that would be a fair statement.
And I guess what this, obviously I know boundaries and land locations have driven a lot of angst, if you will, on making this decision, but I'd just like to hear from you guys just academically. We heard in those meetings a lot of snippets about vertical alignment and number of transitions, but then there were some comments from a 5th grade teacher who talked about well, it'd be kind of interesting if I had 3 other science teachers on my campus, whereas right now I'm the only science teacher, so I have to collaborate with a teacher at another school across town. So I think there's a lot of different academic considerations, and I don't know how we can kind of consolidate those as to which one is the right thing to do for kids, but at the end of the day, I know that's the number one thing I'm making a decision on, so I'm trying, I appreciate some feedback from you guys on your perspective relative to that.
Let's just start. I can tell you that, I from my former district, Wiley, we had 5th and 6th grade campuses at all, that was the model. We went K4 and then 5th, 6th, 7, 8, 9, 12. So that was all the experience I've had for the last 4 years, and it worked really well. You can't compare Wiley to Richardson in terms of a lot of the challenges that we have in terms of some of our campuses, and so it's difficult to say. I would say that one of the conversations that we had at the committee was whatever model that the board ultimately decided that we would go with, if it was to go with 5th and 6th grade centers, that we would have the best 5th and 6th grade centers at Lake Highlands Junior High and Forest Meadows Junior High that you've ever seen. So we would have to do a lot of shifting in terms of support and those kinds of things. And so, that's sort of how I feel about it. And, I'm going to be honest right now that I feel a little bit uncomfortable, only because I was so neutral, I think, whenever I was leading the committee, and I was staying in this neutral role where I wanted to just lead the committee, and I didn't want to sway. But once given the opportunity to share some of my true feelings, I want to be able to share them about the instructional implications, because I am the leader of that role in the district. But so, Chris, Dr. Goodson, you want to share some?
I think ultimately what we realize is the direction that we go, it's incumbent upon us as a district, as the educators, to make sure that it does work for the children and that it does work for the teachers. And I think, going back to what Dr. Stone said, we didn't want anyone to feel as though there wasn't an option, that there was an option that was taken off the table without an extensive amount of conversation. And I think they know that we have to continue to study. I think the committee also knows that our job is to organize the resources, to organize the training, to provide those vertical alignment opportunities. The teachers, as we did the rotations during that last meeting, did talk about, well, what other opportunities are out there? I think I would have an opportunity to, or it would help me to plan with 5 other 5th grade science teachers, because right now I'm the only one at my campus, just like you said. With the K6, the way that we have it right now, that's an opportunity that many of our teachers don't have, because they departmentalize in different ways depending on the campus that they work, the campus where they work. It's hard to say which one is the absolute best model right now, because I think there's more to it than just picking one model. I think one of the other parts that came up during the conversation is that, based on a lot of the research, one of the better models is the K-8 model. That was another part of the conversation that came up. So are we narrowing our scope with just the 5-6? Again, every option was discussed, every option was on the table, whether it was someone else's perspective on the research, or trying to be sure that we heard everyone over the course of those meetings.
Dr. Stern, if I just may add that another perspective in terms of the voice around the room is that we did have the other 3 feeder patterns represented. And the feedback that they shared is that it's important to think about this in terms of a district-wide implication and the message that sends to the other 3 feeder patterns. And if truly, as a leadership team, we identify that there are the merits of moving to a 5-6 are so strong, that then does that imply that we need to have that conversation across the other 3 feeder patterns? And I think and Dr. Stone, forgive me, I am going to share a little bit of my personal feelings about that. The sentiment in the room and where I landed was that yes, there are some benefits of the 5th, 6th. And I think the conversation allowed us to identify what those are, and for us to be intentional about how do we build those into K6. But the implications were not strong enough in favor of a 5-6 that it would mean we would change the instructional model across the whole district. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So yes, there's merit in that model, and yes, positive things for kids and teachers can happen. I don't feel like it was at such an overwhelming level that that would imply that we would need to change the grade configurations across the entire district. Because I do think, yes, Lake Highlands is a unique community with a unique identity, and we need to meet the needs of that. We are ISD as well. And so that was just another perspective I wanted to share. It's good.
All right, thank you for that perspective. I probably have some follow-up questions, but I'll yield for a while. Thanks.
Well, and I thought we were going to be more interactive anyway, so please step in, but.
Okay, and I'll go.
Yeah, except for Chris. And I'm not even sure exactly how to ask this question, but, you know, talking about, because we were starting off just talking about the K-6 model, and, you know, what I also heard was, yeah, you know, we love our K-6 schools, where's it going to be? And Justin started talking about, asked Tony some questions about locations, et cetera. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about, you know, do we think there's other opportunities other than what we've got already identified? And, you know, have we gone down the path of really stretching to figure out, you know, been creative or whatever the right word is for that, for locations? Because, you know, I feel that way. You know, if K-6 is the way to go, and I keep going back and forth myself, to be honest with you. But it really does depend a lot in that area. In Lake Highlands, it depends on the location, because we're trying to identify, you know, we've got schools that are breaking out of the bounds in different parts of the area, and they're redrawing the boundaries, and you want to try to limit that. So is there any way that you can give a little more flavor on maybe stretch opportunities for that? Stretch.
Well, I mean, we can go outside that immediate area. We tried to pick the zone that we shared with the board back in about 8 months ago, 7 months ago, whenever we first started talking about that, was, again, it went from the southern tip of White Rock Elementary attendance boundary to just west of Skillman, and then going really following the Lake Highland or White Rock Elementary attendance boundary on the east side, going north, and then stretching into the southern portion of North Lake attendance boundary. So it did cross over into Merriman Park's boundary just slightly. There was a little bit of a crossover with Lake Highlands Elementary, a little bit with North Lake, but it's predominantly the zone we were targeting was White Rock Elementary School, because that's where the highest concentration of growth is. So within that zone, I mean, we continue to look at the property. We looked at everything that was available, unless you're wanting to eminent domain property, which I'm not sure we've ever done that, and certainly not within the last 25 years. And that creates a whole other set of issues for us if we do that. There's not a better location.
Okay, I appreciate that.
We could go outside that zone, and we could find, you know, property that would, I think one of the challenges that was raised about the White Rock Trail was that it was a 2-lane road, and so you had entrance egress was off of a 2-lane road, and at the 2-lane road, about 15 yards after the property boundary on the north, it ran into a controlled access for Walnut Hill. And so if that was the major concern, one of the things that we brought up in committee and that we discussed with the board is we have 6-10 schools already that have a very similar configuration. The example we used in committee was Heights Elementary School. It's right across the street from our meeting. Heights Elementary primary entrance egress is onto Floyd Road, which is a 2-lane road. When you exit Heights, their queue, you are 10 feet from Beltline Road. Controlled access, 6-lane road. There is very little difference between those two locations as far as the type of road that they feed onto and what they intersect with. Really, the major difference is that Floyd has a sidewalk on both sides of the street, and White Rock Trail does not. It's only on one side of the street. It's not on the eastern side of the street. And that's certainly something that we would be willing to visit with the city about, and granting easement on that property to create additional footpath there. That's really the biggest difference. And I can give you example after example after example of existing schools that have the queue feed onto a 2-lane road. And Floyd Road is a major thoroughfare. There is significant traffic north-south on Floyd Road, as any of you that are familiar with that area can attest to, that would rival the traffic off of White Rock Trail. So that's a great example of it. I mean, you've got North Lake Elementary School. The queue for North Lake is on Ravens Way, and it immediately junctions with Church, which is at least a 4-lane road at that point, and doesn't even have controlled access at Ravens Way and Church. You've got, I mean, there's just a number of them. I mean, take almost any campus and look at where they are. I mean, short of White Rock Elementary, which is embedded in the middle of a neighborhood surrounded by single-family homes, and no major street, no major thoroughfare immediately around it, the majority of our schools actually have, you know, or a significant number of our schools actually have close proximity to a major thoroughfare. That seemed to be the biggest issue with the property. We talked a little bit about the slope of it, but, you know, one issue with a K-6 school you have to be sensitive to is K2 have to be able to egress the building without having to negotiate a stairwell. And so that property on that hill creates an opportunity for us to actually build into the property, or build into the hill, so you could have egress off the second floor that could come straight out onto grass and be able to accommodate more going vertical with the space. You know, there's ways to address the traffic. We looked at all those things before we made the offer on the property. So we do think it is a viable location. It just looks different than what most of our elementary schools would look like from a space standpoint. They have sprawl with them. You know, we have everything's surface. Most of them are 1-story. Parking is surface space. All that, you have to look at it very differently in that particular piece of property. So there's the stretch in my mind. So certainly we can look at other properties. There's not anything else for sale within that zone. We're talking to other owners that have property that's not for sale currently, but I don't know that it would improve that circumstance. So unless you're willing to go out of that zone and then have the requisite change in attendance boundaries that would come to that would be the stretch.
Tony, along that same line, Mr. Harper Road, will you comment about the discussion that ensued about possibly on the Lake Highlands High School footprint for the elementary school?
Yes, an option that was presented to the board was the notion of some type of a land swap with the city of Dallas, where they would make available parkland on the south side of Church, and their proposal was to move our athletic facilities off of the Lake Highlands High School campus across Church, and then build an elementary campus on the Lake Highlands, on the north side of Church, on the existing Lake Highlands High School campus where current athletic facilities are located. So that's an option that was presented to us. You know, what that would do, that has a number of issues associated with it, and certainly we weren't trying to speak for the board, but we just raised questions about that. What you would then do is you'll have thousands of kids going back and forth across Church multiple times a day to be able to do that. We have a significant investment in the athletic facilities that are on the north side of Church on the Lake Highlands High School property. What we would then be also doing is creating a situation very similar to what we have at Richardson High, with West Junior High located on the same property, and creating, that's been that way ever since West was built. If we could go back in time and undo that, I think certainly we would rather have that land just for Richardson High by itself, because now we're presented with challenges there because of being landlocked. You'll create similar types of challenges at Lake Collins High School by building another campus on that property. There were concerns raised at the Reflector Committee meeting about, and from community members since then, about traffic and what you would do with the traffic along Church Road by throwing an elementary school into that mix, and then close proximity to the high school for some of those younger students. So yes, that is an option, but I certainly see where that would solve some issues for the city of Dallas, but I'm not sure that that solves issues for Richardson ISD.
So that leads into another one of my questions on the 5-6 centers on the junior high campuses, and does that get us into that same situation of then becoming landlocked with those junior highs?
Well, it does. It does. I mean, we could do it, and a 5th, 6th grade center is dual there. We talked about the notion of a K-6 site in the same location, and while we indicated that was possible, it's more problematic because you need a little more green. You need some more green space if you're going to have K-6 there as opposed to 5th, 6th. But yes, it would. It would then limit you for junior high future growth there.
And I have one other question, because I know Mr. Bono is just dying over there. So we have, you talked a couple times, and somehow I missed this because I attended several of the Reflector meetings, but the committee was very adamant about if we build 5th, 6th centers, that we would have to have 2 of them. Can you explain a little bit of that to me? Because I know one of the concerns about building a 5th, 6th center at Forest Meadow, is the possibility of having several of our campuses be way below our utilization. So I just had a question as to why that immediately went into that. It's got to be 2.
I'll start out with this conversation. Ms. Branham was the one that reiterated the point. The best way that I can illustrate it is last Tuesday night at the end of the night, it was around midnight, and I received an email from a member of the committee who also happens to be a teacher in the district that said she couldn't go to sleep because she had to get off how she felt about this very thing. And what her feelings that she communicated to me were that she didn't want Lake Highlands Junior High to have that 5th, 6th campus, and then Forest Meadow, which is also in the feeder pattern, to not have it as well. If we were going to do it, we needed to treat both of them equally and not have that division in terms of that feeder pattern. And so I went out to see her the next morning to her campus, because I wanted to visit with her, and we visited for a good long while, because I didn't understand it until I heard her to talk about it. And she was really talking about that feel about Forest Meadow and wanting to make sure that they were not. What else would you say about that?
Yeah, yes, I think that is, and I think that echoes even to the other 3 feeder patterns, that part of the decision that we have to make is this long-term decision about what we really want and how we want to serve our kids and what is going to be the best approach. And that while our intent may never be, the perception sometimes in the community exists that there is a division, or that there is an opportunity that we're not providing an equitable opportunity and experience for kids, even across the district, and then especially within Lake Highlands between those 2 junior highs. That is it is an issue that we deal with on a regular basis. If something is happening at one, why is that not opportunity being provided at both? And so I think that was not just unique from our one educator. I think that was very much the sentiment across the committee, and including our junior, our high school students and the other representatives from the other 3 feeder patterns.
And this teacher that spoke with me, who actually happens to be in the room, and it's Leanne, who's in the back there, who's staying the whole night. She's so involved and passionate about this topic. She was speaking from not only an educator, but also a parent, and has a lot of stakes in that campus and that community. So I appreciated that, because prior to that, as I told her, I would not have ever known that perspective. And so that's the best way I can answer that question.
I'd like to get back to timelines, because I'm a little, with all the information, I just need to remember what we're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about, the reason we had this conversation, we started having this conversation, is overcrowding at White Rock Elementary. Am I mistaken? Okay, so when do we get there? When do we get to the point where White Rock Elementary cannot sustain its population? Is it next year, the year after?
I think you're there now.
We're there now.
We're there.
Okay, we're there yesterday.
And we're in portables next year.
And
at
we're
White Rock
portables next year for sure.
Yes, sir.
So, and if I remember correctly from the conversations about the permitting process for the city of Dallas, we're looking at 2 years from permitting to construction to completion.
For new build.
For new build.
If you want to build an entire new facility, 2-year construction window. Now, bear in mind that what we did, and we talked about this back in March, I think. I think we may have talked about it a couple times. We actually started the design work for, I believe, every single option that Dr. Stone mentioned that would be on the table. Just as a way of being able to give the board the flexibility to move forward and not have to start the clock, give you a little lead time on it. So we've already started the design work for a K-6 school. We've already just started the design work for a 5th, 6th grade center. We've already started the design work for adding on to campuses. All those things are already underway. So yes, there's a 2-year window. Now, what that means is we won't have, the design work is underway. There will be we'll reach different decision points within that 2-year window, and then we'll be coming up later in the summer for you, if that's kind of if you're talking about timeline.
Yeah, I just need to know, I mean, in terms of when we would accept or just make a decision on a proposal and from start to completion, when we could have a potentially new facility, whether it's a 5th, 6th, or K through 6, open and ready for enrollment.
August of 2018.
And when does that decision need to be made?
You would have until, for that decision, since there's no way to have it done for August of 2017 at all, not for a new build. So since you're August 2018, we could, as long as we knew by, I think our next decision point will trigger in August. And at that point, we would want to be able to award, go out to bid on a construction manager risk and bring that company into that process for us before we move forward with the permitting process for the city.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I just want to express my gratitude to my colleagues, because I think your questions have thoroughly kind of vetted out these 2 options. And I'm not going to repeat questions that have already been asked, but I also would love to be able to move back to one of the next steps that you mentioned, Dr. Stone, and that is the survey that's going out tomorrow morning.
Yes.
So before I depart from our conversation, I just wanted to tell people I was departing. Are y'all good with that, or Ms. Greenbaum?
I have one more just clarification between these 2, if we could. I want to make sure I heard kind of what you said correctly originally, was that the committee's recommendation was for 1 K-6 school, but then I think Dr. Gibson added that there was sentiment that that might not be enough, that at some point we might need 2, whether it was at the end of this bond or the next one. But so my question is associated with, if during this bond we build one K-6 school, does that give us enough relief at some of the other places where we originally looked at targeting additional classrooms in other places across the district? Or are those still on the table needed for those parts of the district and not necessarily really go to White Rock? I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but.
Include in your answer, Mr. Harper Road, about the need for an additional K-6 school and when that might occur, that need might arise.
And or if that impacts additional classrooms added to existing elementaries or certain sets of relief that we've talked about over the.
Of course, it depends on, same question that the committee had. It depends on where you build it, and it depends on what you ultimately decide to do on the attendance boundaries. If you were to build one in the Lake Highlands Junior High feeder pattern, and however you decided to redraw boundaries there, that you would provide relief to White Rock. Of course, that's the primary target. You could provide relief to Wallace. You would have enough capacity to provide relief to that attendance area. So the school that becomes the outlier for that within Lake Highlands area is Stoltz, because they will reach or exceed their capacity figure within that 5-year period too. So the only way to deal with that would be either to change the attendance boundaries and sweep all the way across the Lake Highlands area. I don't know that there's enough. You could build one in the Forest Meadow Junior High feeder pattern area that would provide relief for Stoltz. You could address Skyview, Forest Lane, Aiken, potentially. There's some possibilities there. The other possibility is one the committee discussed and one that we have been looking into is a second site, a second land acquisition in the northern, kind of the crescent of the Lake Highlands attendance zone. So, the northern part of Wallace, stretching over Thurgood Marshall, Skyview, Aiken, Forest Lane, kind of that stretch there. You have some growth in that area that would provide relief for Wallace and those campuses as well. But that still leaves Stoltz as sort of an outlier. You don't have an issue at Moss Haven. You don't really have an issue at Merriman Park. So, the concern on the western side is it's really more Stoltz and not necessarily the entire Forest Meadow Junior High attendance boundary. So, that being said, if you built one within this bond, then there would still be an issue at Stoltz that you would either add on to that campus, or if you didn't want to add on into any farther portables, could be used as a temporary solution, or you can continue to overflow students or change the attendance boundary. So those are kind of your options there. But going back to that second site, one of the things the committee discussed was using bond dollars to acquire the land, which you've already passed a resolution to be able to refund the land acquisition for White Rock Trail. And we're certainly not limited to just that site. You could decide if another parcel presented itself, we could buy an additional parcel and consider that as a building site as well. There are enough dollars there to be able to build a new campus, whether it's a K-6 campus or whether it's a 5th, 6th grade campus. You can build one of those, and then you'd have dollars to be able to. You have about $41 million right now. So, and that's just within the proposed bond. And that's certainly not all the dollars that are available. That's just within the proposed bond. So if you take $4.5 million out for the White Rock Trail acquisition, so now you're down to $36.5 million. You build a new school, let's say it costs $25 million. Well, now you're down to $11 million. So you have enough to be able to add on to a campus or a couple, maybe 2 campuses, 3 campuses, and buy a parcel of land. Depends on the cost of the land. At $11 million, and I know several of you know more about this than I do, and I know Mr. Bono does. I mean, you could easily spend $11 million on another parcel of land. particularly if it's not raw dirt or if it's an income-producing property, like an apartment complex or something that has a high occupancy rate. We would easily spend $11 million to buy a secondary parcel of land. So, but that was the kind of the thought on the dollar figure, is that you give yourself the ability to buy a parcel and start that process that would lead into the next bond for construction. So kind of a two-phase approach.
Thank you.
So we still have a few more questions. I think Mr. Bonham has some questions, and then we'll segue into the survey. But this is our opportunity here tonight to get all those thoughts and observations. So, Mr. Bonham?
Thank you. One thing that, well, first of all, while we're kind of on that, building on that question, do we have current numbers, like, as of today or in the last few weeks, kind of where Wallace is relative to enrollment / overflow? And I know we had kind of the beam snapshot from the fall, but do we know kind of where they are current, roughly? If not, we can get
No,
off.
if you move on to your next question while you're,
And if not, we can get that later, but I think that's going to be an important discussion because I feel like they've continued to add kids throughout the year and maybe at a different place than what their snapshot is. So my other question was really relative to staff that was in that meeting, and it seemed like, at least the ones I listened to, and I'll be interested to hear your feedback, or your perspective, that there was a lot of conversation around kind of current master schedule challenges and the way with 6th graders on their campus, how that makes them have to do their master schedule, and how much easier it would be to plan a master schedule around 5 grades rather than 7th grades. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts on kind of some operational challenges that they're having and how that might have pushed some of them to consider a 5-6 versus a K-6.
yeah, it would, I'm going to push this one at Dr. Goodson because he has the elementary experience. So why don't you speak to some of the challenges that they may have been responding to that with?
I think the challenges go back to what Mr. Harlow mentioned in terms of the fine arts aspect, the band and choir, or band and orchestra. Those teachers come from other campuses. So as an elementary principal, I don't really have, I'm not the person who makes the decision about when I have band. So I get notification that my band teacher will be coming to our campus at 8 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That lets me know where my master schedule starts. Because I know there's not really a lot of flexibility in when those junior high teachers or high school teachers can come to my campus to provide band and orchestra. It's just a part of developing the schedule, so everything starts with that. And then after that, I still work in, the core content, I work in lunch, I work in specials. I might have a specials teacher that travels from another campus. And so if Tabitha is my music teacher and she's part-time at Spring Ridge and the other part is just Harbin, I have to work with that aspect of the schedule too. So there are so many other variables just from a master schedule perspective that come into play. But ultimately, that band orchestra schedule is the starting point for an elementary principal.
So I think his question was, do you think that just that alone, eliminating that scheduling, those kinds of, or operational kinds of challenges, do you think that factored into how some of the educators weighed in on this decision?
I think it affected their decision, absolutely. I think there's an operational and a logistical piece that comes with the master schedule, and if I know that 6th grade not being on my campus gives me flexibility in the schedule, I might lean in that direction, absolutely. If you asked me that same question when I was an elementary principal a while back, I might be leaning in that direction too.
Okay, yeah, I certainly felt that, and obviously we'll get in the survey here in a minute. It'll be interesting now to be able to dissect this survey by parents and staff and students and see how those line up by different groups, because obviously within the committee it was very difficult to do that. I think we all had sense that, you know, it might have been leaning one way or the other depending on certain subgroups, but so, you know, I guess it's interesting building on something Ms. Graham said earlier. You know, obviously there's not an intent from you guys to change the rest of the district into a 5-6 model. And we said from the beginning, and, you know, some neighbors of mine have said loud and clear that, hey, just because the rest of the district doesn't do it doesn't mean that, you know, we don't still do it if it's right for Lake Highlands, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I guess as I've tried to step back from this and that 55 to 45 vote really kind of solidified where I thought everybody was, because, you know, I talked to a person on Monday who loves the 5-6 idea, and then I talked to somebody on Tuesday that absolutely hates it, right? And then, you know, the reverse is true from a K-6 standpoint. So I've been able to get really zero consensus in my conversations around around one or the other either. So what I've spent this time reflecting and trying to step back and say, since that consensus doesn't exist, what concerns me about one or the other? So, and, you know, I had kind of this visual the other day of me making a decision for my own family of where to live 8 years ago, or, you know, somebody that's moving into our district today, and, you know, let's assume we go to the 5-6 model. You know, they now are making the decision of, you know, where to move and buy a house. I mean, I talked to 2 guys I was having, you know, coffee with in the real estate business last week that have young families that are both moving to our ISD. And, you know, they're making a decision on which elementary schools they'll move into. And it just struck me that, you know, you could fast forward 2 years and they're not only making a decision of which elementary school zone to move into, they're making a decision of, okay, do I want my child to have a K-4 elementary experience, or do I want them to have a K-6 elementary experience? And it really, I'm just telling you, I'm concerned at, you know, we're going to do the right thing. You guys are going to do the right thing for kids educationally, regardless of where we end up, and I know that. But as I step back and think about those decisions, it gives me greater concern for frankly, the future of the neighborhood that I live in, because I know what decision I would have made. I would have made the decision to keep my kid in that elementary school environment through 6th grade. And so it concerns me about the future of my neighborhood with that shortening that 2 years, and what happens to those elementary schools over time if now people start moving into our other feeders because they have the choice to do so. So that's the thing I'm chewing on and I'm struggling with, because you know, I know educationally we can do great things for kids either direction, but to me it's more about you know, the future of a neighborhood and the future of a feeder, and you know, that gives me some pretty significant pause when I think about young families making that decision and really weighing those 2 options within our district. So you know, I know we're going to get the survey. We'll see what, you know, the broader community thinks, and we'll continue to work through this. But I'll just say that's one item I'm having a hard time getting past. So.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I have a big concern about that. And part of I come at it from a little bit different take, but same conclusion. I'm very anti-complexity. Unless you've got a really compelling reason to introduce complexity to your model, you shouldn't do it. I think this introduces complexity from a planning, staffing, neighborhood decision perspective. I think it adds complexity. And I think that if something's the right answer for Lake Highlands, it's the right answer for RISD, and vice versa. If it's the wrong answer for RISD, it's the wrong answer for Lake Highlands. They're all kids, they're all families, regardless of the geography of where they live. We talked earlier about the fact that we're approaching things systemically. We have to think systemically. We have to think about what models, what ways of planning and operating give us the most leverage and allow us to have the most repeatable processes and curriculum and things so that we can get the most out of our staff and get the most out of our kids. So the 5th, 6th grade model just gives me a lot of concern for all those reasons. And I guess, the big negative being the location on K6, to some degree, I don't really get. Because, obviously the location is going to be a location that's going to address the problem where the crowding is. So if the concern was that, well, we don't know because we don't know where we're going to build it, that's one thing. That to me doesn't make any sense because we're going to build it in a place to solve the problem. But if you're telling me that you don't like it because you're afraid it's going to affect I get that. I understand that because that's painful. None of us wants to have to go there. That's painful. But it's not because we don't know where it's going to be built. It's going to be built. If you need surgery, you're going to operate on the part of your body that needs the work, right? And the K6 seems a little bit more surgical to me than a 5-6, which seems a little bit more shotgun. It's going to affect a lot of campuses that don't have a capacity problem. They're very happy the way things are going right now. I've heard that from a lot of people in Lake Highlands. It's like, why am I having to send my 5th and 6th graders when we don't have a capacity issue? So, somebody needs to help me to understand, instructionally, to me, the 5-6, the only reason to go that way is if it's, much better instructionally, because it seems as though the primary problem it's trying to solve is keeping the grown-ups happy from an attendance boundary perspective, right? And it does do that, but if we're going to introduce that complexity and go down that path and potentially consider the possibility of doing that as a district, then to me, the only reason I'm going to do that is if it's the best thing instructionally for kids. So that's where I am on it. And I don't know if, I know we're going to have a session next week. I don't know if we're going to, get to that point. If Dr. Stone, if you guys are going to be able to come in with some of that information that will help us make that decision or not. I'm certainly willing to commit to making that decision, but what I don't want to do is make it before we're ready. So I don't know what everybody else thinks or Ms. Caston, where your thoughts are in terms of the timeline for making that decision. But I agree with what Mr. Bono said at the Lake Highlands meeting, which is that this is a generational decision that we need to not rush into. So we need to make sure that we're comfortable before we do that. So anyway, I said a lot of stuff there, but.
And thank you, that's a perfect segue, because what I keep wanting to say is whatever decisions, whatever solutions we come up with, and I keep wanting to tell the community this, is that I have confidence that we'll make it work. Like when you talk about that building, I have confidence that you can make that work. If we go to 5-6, I have confidence that our educators can make it work. And I think that's where so much angst comes from is, we know we're going to make it work, and I don't know how to express it, but to tell the parents and community members out there that
you know, I think we do deserve some trust here that we're gonna make good decisions and we're gonna make whatever decisions we make work. Thank you.
Just a couple more things that jogged a couple other thoughts. Building on my previous comment, you know, and back to kind of the accountability discussion. You know, I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you that I, you know, certainly don't base decisions on test scores on my end, but I am concerned about the optics that, especially as, you know, our legislators are forcing us into this A through F rating system of our schools, and the volatility that could put in the system of, you know, absent this decision, you could have two schools that are both rated A or B that both look and feel the same, and now all of a sudden those two schools that would be rated A or B, one in Richardson is now still rated A or B, and this other one in Lake Highlands could be rated a C or D just because of the makeup of their student body has changed. And so, you know, that, you know, building on my previous point, just is something I'm really, you know, really concerned about as we, you know, as we head into that, kind of head in further into this discussion. And I'll say that because I know, you know, a lot of people are going to, you know, there's people listening tonight and people pick this up on video. I don't say all this to end the conversation at all about how we creatively look at executing whatever option we end up with and thoughtfully consider the transition in getting to where we ultimately get to. Because I think this conversation has also brought up a lot of other questions, right? I mean, we're starting to ask the how big is too big question, and, you know, we've got really big schools in the Lake Highlands feeder right now, and a lot of them have significantly high populations of economically disadvantaged students. And, you know, I think we need to continue to have the discussion about, you know, I mean, is a 800 student school the right size for a population with high economically disadvantaged kids, or does that need to look differently? So I think there's a lot more to this than, you know, where are we going to put those couple of hundred extra kids at White Rock that are going to be there over the next several years? There's a lot more to that than there, and what does the future landscape of Lake Highlands look like? And I think regardless of which decision we make, that doesn't change that we need to be really thoughtful about how to transition there over time. And so I want people to understand that this isn't a flip a switch and this, you know, this gets done. There's still a lot of thought for how we can execute this and, you know, soften the blow on families, if you will. So.
Thank you, Justin, for that. So I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of observations. First of all, Dr. Stone, thank you and your staff for some really authentic sharing your perspective, sharing what's on your heart, and we really appreciate y'all's doing that. It's very genuine. To board members, you guys had great questions. I appreciated the flow of the questions tonight. You know, you start off with asking questions for clarification and understanding, and then as we got into it at the end, everybody really shared what was on their heart and what they're thinking, and shared that also honestly and authentically. I think what I've heard tonight as board president, if I can wrap things up for us all, is that this decision will be made once we feel like we have, Dr. Stone, all of the information and the data, first of all, that we need to make that instructionally, keeping our children at the center. And then once we feel like we have all the data points and all the information that we need, then we will feel comfortable arriving at a solution that meets the needs for kids today, but also provides for future growth, not only in the Lake Highlands area, but this will be a template for how we continue to address growth in our other 3 attendance zones, because we're seeing great growth. We're located in just in a fantastic place in the Metroplex, and people are going to continue, as I like to say, to be the path to our door. So we do have a follow-up work session next week where we'll continue to discuss these options. We do need to talk about the survey, but I'm going to ask us if we can take just a quick 5-minute break, okay? And then we'll come back and debrief the survey. Okay, real quick? All right. Dr. Stone, at this point, I'm going to we'll do the discussion of the survey, and so with that, I will turn it over to you.
And I will turn it over, I guess, back to Dr. Kuhn, who had some comments or questions about the survey itself. So,
absolutely, thank you so much. Just if you could reflect for us on some clarification about the process and how you're going to administer the survey, and then one reflection for you. One reflection that I would add, and thank you for pulling up this screenshot. It occurred to me that we might actually get better information if this question was set up as a Likert scale. I'm just throwing that out there. Right now we've got 3 dichotomous choices, and so you're either going to have to stuff yourself into one of 3 choices, or if we could just make a statement that says, I could support construction of a new K-6 elementary school, how much do you agree with this statement, yes or no? We might actually be able to parse out some more variation around how people feel about that. If we put it on a 1 to 5 scale, where I agree, I don't agree, or I strongly agree, or strongly disagree. So I just wanted to throw that out for the board's consideration and for yours, and then throw it back to you to talk through the process for administering the survey.
okay. Does the board have any thoughts on that? I certainly would defer to Dr. Kuhn's expertise in this area over mine, so y'all's thoughts.
Well, I tend to agree with Dr. Kuhn. I think that would be helpful in engaging the support versus just a yes or no, black or white type of answer. So I would appreciate that as a data point.
Okay.
This is a different question, but so I'll just wait. Are we 3 talking about that?
Now, I was just going to say, I mean, you guys are really the survey experts, and if you think that will get us a better result, I'm very comfortable with moving toward that.
You know, one thing I thought about was there's going to be some people that, I mean, given that we started with 14 options here, there are going to be some people in the community that look at these 2 options and are thinking, well, I don't like either one of those. I still like whatever I threw out. Right? And so, to your point, I was sitting there thinking about, you know, where do don't like any one of those respond as other. And to your point, I think the level of support for one or the other captures the kind of cumulative sentiment of, you know, how where people are on this scale, and probably takes care of that concern as well. But I'm good with that.
So then about process, the plan was to deploy the survey at noon tomorrow to the broad community, and there are some different systems in place that are handled through our Elvia Noriega's department, where they are able to ensure that only one IP address responds to the survey and those kinds of things. Because of the makeup of the survey itself, we'll be able to, she will need 24 hours after the survey closes to do the breakdown that we would need for you to be able to see where all the responses from, where all the responses came, and all of that disaggregation that she does that goes into the makeup of the survey. So the thought was to, and I would love for you to weigh in on this, to open the survey tomorrow, to close it 1 week later, so noon next Tuesday, and then she would need 24 hours to break it down. And we can talk about when you all want to get together to look at that, if it would be the next night or the following Monday night. what the plan is in terms of pushing that out. Again, Tim Clark is a big leader in this in terms of our communications department. They have ways to push this out to HOAs and to all of the campuses, the websites. There are also standard systems in place for family members that do not have technology, that they can get hard copies and complete those, and they can be scanned back in and included in the results. So all of those things have already been processed, and you can, how do you feel about some of that?
What's the audience that you're planning to promote it to? Is it the whole district or Lake Highlands, or what's the plan there?
It's the whole district, and so these are some of the, and we've tweaked these in a little bit to make them a little bit clearer, even since I put this together this afternoon, but so you can see the different audiences. It will go out to really anyone who wants to respond, who has skin in the game in terms of the community, can respond. So it could be just a taxpayer that doesn't have kids in school, but they're paying taxes to the school district. So it's really just a broad community, and then this will allow us to then break it down by Lake Highlands, looking to see how Lake Highlands feels about the different issues, how each campus feels about the different issues, and then the at-large community.
I'm assuming that we're going to use social media also to promote this through Facebook. Am I right?
And if you'll permit me to read the list so that we're all very clear about the distribution, I'll go ahead and do that.
That's great.
So we are starting with School Times weekly newsletter. We are going to utilize our Blackboard Connect mass notification system. We're going to have a link available from our homepage, risd.org. We are going to leverage the HOA listserv that Dr. Stone mentioned earlier. We are also going to work through our social media channels. We are going to have hard copies available at schools for those who don't have access to a device where they could fill out the survey. And then we are also going to work with the Lake Highlands Early Childhood PTA. Finally, we are going to make this survey available in Spanish.
And our PTA as well?
We can certainly add that to the list, absolutely.
I'm just wondering. Okay.
So, Dr. Stone, I had a question on the demographics, which of the following best describes you. The first one, RISD parent/guardian and taxpayer. Can you help me understand the and taxpayer? I mean, will that cause confusion on some folks' part? Is that necessary? How is that if you're just an RISD parent or guardian?
So I actually spent a little bit of time with Dr. Kieran, I might say, before we started, because she does have the experience, and we did break that down. How did we work on that one? Do you remember?
I think it was current RISD parent, and then RISD taxpayer, right? Because we actually went around the horseshoe and we said, how would each one of us answer this, right? Because I might be an RISD employee or a current RISD employee, but I'm not a taxpayer. But we want your opinion on it. Or I'm a current RISD student, or Dr. Goodson, you hit that last bucket, right? Current ISD parent, guardian, employee, and taxpayer, right? And so we thought by adding the word current in front of it, that kind of helped parse it a little bit, but there's a lot of non-mutually exclusive categories within here, which makes it difficult to, unless you go into branching questions, which then added some complexity.
So do you have to have taxpayer or RISD parent/guardian, or has that been removed? I mean, there's some folks in our community that won't know what that means. And
I think we went back and forth on that. We assumed if you were a current RISD parent or guardian that you were a taxpayer. But then because we attacked taxpayer on the other categories, like RISD employee and taxpayer, that is not a current parent.
okay. So let me ask Mr. Harbour a question. If I live in multifamily housing, am I a taxpayer?
I consider if you live in RISD, you are a taxpayer. It's just that some of you get to deduct your taxes on your income tax return, and some of you pay them in the form of rent.
So culture.
So everybody pays taxes.
Right, but are there cultural biases in that? And I'm just want to make sure that,
I think you may have some people that, since they don't physically write a check to our ISD, they may not view themselves as taxpayers. I mean, my view of taxpayers is broader than that. Just because if you live here, you are paying taxes one way or the other, you are. But not everybody shares that broader view.
What's the problem with choosing resident?
No problem from my end.
I'm writing that down. Okay.
other questions? Y'all feel like this gives us the information from the survey that the board needs to make decisions? Is there anything?
Can I go back to the questions on number 3 and number 4, please? And okay, so I think we've decided that we're going to use the question on a 5 scale, and I forgot the name of the
Likert.
Likert. Okay, thank you. So is it going to say I could support, or I will support, or how will it? Because I think.
So I think the statement ends up being, please indicate how much you agree with the following statement. And the statement is this first option.
Okay, I support. I mean, could you remove the word could and it would be more direct? Like, I support construction of new K through 6 elementary. I do not support the construction of.
So the last 2 options would drop off. It would just be one statement and you agree or disagree with it.
Okay.
So we could drop that word could.
I just worry that it's just left open to a little bit more interpretation. Either it's, I mean, I kind of think either if you're going to use a gradient scale like that, then you should be more direct in your assertion of, I can support it or I can't support it.
And does the Likert scale have a 0 so that if you don't support it, or is it only 1 through 5? So don't we?
Just 1 through 5.
So don't we still need a statement that says I do not support?
No, you strongly disagree with the statement that says I support it.
Okay.
So 5 would be agree and 1 would be disagree. And your Likert scale, right?
Or you can make it strongly disagree or strongly agree too. Like, you just have to decide how you want to parse that variation.
So I have a question, because one of the things, and I don't know how you.
By the way, I'm a little uncomfortable with getting promoted to chiefess survey person. Like,
We all have our
I
gifts.
don't know. There are plenty of people who know a lot more about surveys than I
We
do.
can visit with Elvia in the morning.
Yeah, I understand.
And her
Make sure you
staff
get an extra
and some
cupcake.
guidance.
Right.
My other question was on this K-6, and really, one of the things that we heard that resonated in the first part of the discussion was that people were concerned about the location and if it would impact them. Is it appropriate to have a question that says, I support a K-6 school if it doesn't impact my attendance boundaries? I mean, and I know it sounds funny, but truly, we heard that people say, well, I don't support it because I don't know where it's going to be. The location's important. So
I think that comes out in your Likert scale. I could be over-interpreting that, but I think that you leave it to your reader of your survey to determine what they're valuing around that proposal. And if what they value more is knowing the location, they're going to probably rate it strongly disagree versus something on the other side. I mean, that would be my interpretation of it, but again, like, we're probably way too far in the weeds at this point.
Although
And that's my question too, and is, listening to the committee, they kept coming back to that very issue. It depends on where are you going to build it? And it really goes back to what Mr. Oliver said. I mean, is there, you're going to build it where you have the need. And so is there some value in saying that in the survey is that, we're talking about building a school where we have the growth. And so you're going to give, a campus like Moss Haven maybe some, less anxiety about that because we're not experiencing the growth in Moss Haven, for example. But is there some value to saying something along the lines of what Mr. Oliver was saying earlier, that we're going to build a school where we have the growth in students.
I think, yeah, and if you could describe it the way that you did earlier by saying it's this corridor, right? It's bounded by the southern boundary of the district and skill. I mean, that's where it is. And if you framed it that way to say a new K-6 school that addressed crowding in that area, right? That's how you would describe it.
Because I think you're going to get, it just depends on the question, you're going to get very different answers. And
right.
So if you ask everyone, and I know Dr. Stone and I had an opportunity to talk about that, and we tried to talk to the committee about that, would you support this if it meant your child? I mean, it's easy to volunteer somebody else's child to change schools, but if it meant your child changing schools, do you still support it? So I think if there's just a way for us to tie that in to make that more specific, because I'm not sure, I understand what you're saying, Dr. Kewen, but I'm not sure I would just be opposed to it if I thought it was going to be that my child would have to change. I think there'll be a bunch of people who feel that way.
In outlines, Mr. Overbrook, you could also say, well, because we've done this in the past, and we just did it for, I think, Mark Twain, didn't we, where we grandfathered some kids, and we allowed siblings to go to stay at the same school. I mean, that could be a factor too. If your kids were allowed to go to the same school that we built, you built a K through school, your kids were allowed to go to the same school, et cetera, would you support this, or how do you feel about that? I mean, I think there's lots of possibilities that you can add to that, but I think the goal, at least my hope, is that we keep this brief, that this could be answered very easily in the span of about 5 minutes. Less than. So I just think we need to really focus on what the core objective is for the 5 questions or 8 questions or whatever we come up with.
But I think that's a good point. I think the objective here was to make sure that we were being inclusive of a larger community input beyond the Reflector Committee, and I'm really glad that we're doing this. I'm grateful that you guys are putting this together, and so I just, knowing that was our objective, I think it's important to keep in mind.
So I guess, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure that I know where we've landed, I guess, is my question, and that I do think brief is awesome, but brief in a way that we end up getting data that doesn't really help us because we haven't given them enough choices. It concerns me a little bit. I think the question of whether or not you support it at all, or whether you support it if it's going to impact you, or however we phrase it, we heard repeatedly in the Reflector Committee meetings that people said, not the Reflector, I'm sorry, the community bond meetings, that people said, well, yeah, I'd support it, but only if you tell me where it's going to be. And I'm not going to support it if you can't tell me where it's going to be. If we don't have some sense of which side of that fence they're on, then they may just all vote no for a reason that is really not what it was we were trying to find out. I'm not sure how we say it, but.
So I think one of the things we're kind of implicitly recognizing here is that there is a significant limitation associated with the data we're going to get from this survey. I mean, it will inform our decision, it's not going to dictate our decision, because we know that many parents are going to answer this in a way that is very slanted towards trying to do, what they want to do for their kid. And the problem is for us, we have to not only worry about their kid, but every kid that comes after them for the next 50 or 60 years. So that's the situation that we're in, and the kind of decision we have to make, which is a very different situation than they're in, which is they've got a 2nd or 3rd grader, and they're worried about whether or not they're going to have to change schools, and that's going to affect the way they answer this. And so it doesn't mean we shouldn't do the survey, it just means we all need to recognize that it's going to be severely limited in terms of the kind of information we get. So
I think the people, at least in Lake Highlands, that would answer this know whether their school has a growth issue or not. And as a result, I think they'll be looking at it through whatever the appropriate set of lenses are. I'll tell you, I hadn't had anybody that I've talked to, approach the 5-6 center, for example, with, and I'm really excited to send, for you to pull my 5th and 6th grader out of an elementary school setting and send them to, I mean, that's all evolved as a compromise to whatever situation they're in, because they see that as a good alternative to whatever they think is going to happen with the K-6. So I think depending on, and I think we'll, with the way the questions are worded, I think we'll see those nuances come out by neighborhood in the discussion. So, I what's the board as we, see how that spreads across the community and look at it school by school and, see what those trends look like. I mean, to Chris's point, you're not going to be able to get, a definitive decision. You're just seeing, does your trending in this survey line up with what you were hearing from the reflector community as an additional point of data.
So, next steps, and I guess what's going through my mind, if I'm a parent at a school that doesn't have an enrollment issue or a future enrollment issue, if I know you're not going to move my attendance boundary, and you ask me the question, if you ask the question, do you support a K-6 school if you don't change my attendance boundary? My answer is absolutely. Do I support building a K-6 school that changes my attendance boundary? And I'm speaking through the lens of a parent, and I don't have an enrollment issue at my school. My answer is no. So how do you get, so I want to make sure that we have that type of information.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a much more interesting question to ask somebody would be, do you prefer the K-6 model or the 5-6 or the K-4 5-6 model? Period. Right? I mean, just generally, do you want to continue to sustain and support the K-6 model, or do you think that do you prefer a K-4 5-6 model?
Talking about to the whole district?
No, I'm just saying. I guess I'm just phrasing the question a little bit differently, as opposed to saying doing it to address enrollment growth. Which of those models do you think is a better model for kids and instructionally, and which model do you prefer? I mean, isn't that framing it just a little bit differently?
But you still have an issue of enrollment growth. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive.
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to eliminate the immediacy of the attendance boundary thing to say, hey, just generally speaking, if you were the king and you could do anything you want, would you prefer a K-6 model? Or do you think the K-4 5-6 model is a better model? And if everybody tells you the K-4 5-6 model is a better model, but if everybody tells you the K-6 model is better, then you know the only reason they're saying no is because they're scared. I mean, if everybody likes the K-6 model, then that's the model we need to try to sustain, regardless of the attendance boundary impacts, because that's a temporary problem. Again, we're talking a long-term systemic. Which model is it that we want to have for our kids? Do you like the K-4, 5, 6, or do you like the K-6 model?
So I think we could work on rephrasing this question and maybe lead with this question, and then put the two questions about the Likert scales, about however we choose to phrase it for 3 and 4 after that, and it kind of gets at what you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Like just philosophically, which
I think
one do you agree with?
If you just got yourself out of the enrollment issue and said, hey, if you went to somewhere in the Pierce attendance area and said, hey, do you like the K-4, 5, 6 model better or the K-6 model? If you remove the fear of the attendance boundary issue, which is it that you'd rather have? That, I would really like to know that from the Lake Highlands community.
So I guess I'm hearing there might be some revisions to this. Do we have enough time in order to get this out at noon? Or like, what do we need to do to get people comfortable with where this is at?
I will do revisions to this, like I did this morning, and send you out a version of it first thing in the morning that you can look at and then weigh in? Is that appropriate?
If you make your comments back to Dr. Stone directly.
Is there anything magic about noon tomorrow?
Well, it just gives you a whole nother day, right? I mean, you don't have the day for people to answer.
Right, but I mean, I'm just saying, given the gravity of the decision that you're making, don't we want to take the time to get this wording right? If that means that we don't make noon tomorrow, isn't that okay? And if we need to push and say we're going to release at the end of the day, or noon Wednesday, and get it right and do it once.
I totally agree, I'd rather get it right, I'd rather it be clarifying as opposed to confusing, and so I'm all for getting it right.
So I don't want it to feel rushed for you all, or for staff, and I think we need to get the wording right. And if that means we don't send it till noon on Wednesday, then we leave it open for a week, and then we bring it back to you a week from Wednesday.
I'll work on the revision to get to you, and then we'll get it right when we get it right. Won't set it out till we get it right.
Well, it strikes me too, though, that based on the comments that you already had with Dr. Kuhn about the Likert scale, that you wouldn't have to make that much change other than to add insert a new number 3, which is in general, do you prefer the K6 versus the K4, 5, and 6 model? Then you get to the question, one of the proposed solutions in the growth area is, and they get a chance to further answer that from a little more finite question.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need a survey to know what everybody's gonna prefer. I mean, it's gonna be like 90-something%, so.
I prefer may not be the right
The
word.
The question is, but given the circumstance you're in, which option, I mean, that's how they're gonna read numbers 3 and 4 or whatever.
And maybe we don't say, do you prefer, maybe we ask it, what model would you like for your child? I mean, maybe if we're talking about, we're trying to do what's best for kids, maybe the question is.
But they're not all going to have children, this is going out.
You're right, okay.
I will work on a revision and get that to you, and then we'll get it right.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into closed session. The next item on our agenda is review of board documents, but we will do that at the end of the closed session. I don't even know if we have any discussion on that tonight. That way, if you're not involved in the closed session, you may call it an evening. So with that, we're going to enter into a closed meeting in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney, and